members?
Yes. Yes, everyone's here.
Okay. We're all good? We're all here? All right, I am calling to order the regular bi-monthly meeting of the Marin Water Board of Directors for June 1st, 2021. The first order of business is to call the roll.
Director Bragman,
Present.
Director Gibson,
Here.
Director Russell,
Here.
Director Schmidt,
Present.
and President Kohler.
Here. I am now looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Second.
Do we have any public comment on the agenda, Terry?
I see Mr. Roberts' hand. I don't think it's for this, but oh, he took it away. Okay.
Great.
Wait, hold on. Let me see. He brought it back up. Let me just double check. Mr. Roberts,
Yes.
did you have a comment regarding the agenda?
No, it's an item not on the agenda. I just want to congratulate Ben on the piece he wrote in the IJ. The tone was right, the content was right, and just a good job, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
So before we get to further public comments, Roger, though, we need to have a roll call vote on adopting the agenda. We have a motion and a second.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. All right, the next order of business is public comment on items not on the agenda. Do we have any further public comments on items that are not agendized tonight, Terry?
No further from anyone else.
Okay, then I'm going to move on to directors and general manager announcements. Ben, do you have anything? I just thought I'd start with you tonight.
I do very briefly. I just wanted to let the board know that staff will be contacting you to schedule an annual board retreat. We're looking tentatively at sometime September, maybe early October. And we'll be talking to you more about the agenda. I doubt it'll stray too far from water supply. I also wanted to note that we are thinking about, and as the county levels move to yellow and hopefully better over time, the timing and process for staff to fully return to work, and also at the same time thinking about board meetings, and we'll be going back to in-person. We'll be talking more about that. I believe it's going to be June 15th will be the move to yellow, and I'll be talking to you more. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Any other board announcements?
I have none. Nothing. Nothing.
I'm not seeing any. Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
Move approval. Second.
Second.
Do we have any board comment on the consent calendar? I'm not seeing any. Do we have any public comment, Terry, on the consent calendar?
We may have one. Yes, I believe we have two. I have Roger Roberts.
I don't know what's going on. On my screen, it shows my hand is lowered.
Oh, okay.
We're gonna get
All
to a
right.
tech assist, Roger.
Maybe you should turn it upside down, Roger.
Yeah.
Okay,
I have Baron
another-
Hamel. Hello, Ms. Hamel.
Thank you. One quick question, and hi to everyone. If you're going to be going to have the board meetings live again with the public invited to participate live, will you also be streaming it on Zoom so that people who do not want to be in a crowded room can still participate?
I'll just respond if that's okay, President Kohler.
absolutely.
That is really central to what we're looking into. And it'll include the logistics and the Brown Act, but I do think we've anticipated that issue and we'll include it when we bring this back for discussion with the board.
Okay, thank you for that. So just getting back to the consent calendar, we don't have any more comments on the consent calendar.
That is correct.
Okay, then let's have a roll call vote on that item.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt. You're on mute,
Aye.
sir.
Sorry. Aye.
And President Kohler.
Aye. That brings us to the regular calendar. Our first item, which is actually item 5, is renewal of insurance policies.
Good evening, President Kohler and members of the board. This is an approval item asking to renew the annual insurance policies for the district. So as you can see in the item, we are seeing some pretty marked increases in our insurance premiums. We did, expect that. We talked about that a bit during the budget process. I think the increases we're seeing are probably even larger than we expected. So essentially, we're looking at the quote that we have so far. We're anticipating it's going to be about $1.27 million for our annual premiums, and you compare that to last year, $750,000. So you can see in the summary that different components are broken out, and our property insurance for all property is going up by about 72%, increase of about $148,000. Part of that is due to the total insured value that we increased last year, and it was such an increase that we were allowed to step up that the premiums associated with that increase in value over 2 years. So this is the second year of the increase, so that's a portion of that. And then part of that is just the market forces that are driving up insurance premiums, and I'll have the gentleman from Alliance speak to that in a moment. But the pressures they're seeing within California are driving up all of the prices in insurance. Actually, our former carrier, which was Argonaut, is pulling out of the California market, so they didn't even offer us a renewal option for the premiums. We also saw the excess liability going up. That's going to go up markedly. So we got a quote on the first layer of that up to the first $5 million, and that's $375,000 compared to last year $209,000. And then on the excess liability layers that take us up to $25 million in insurance, we're still getting quotes coming in on those. And then you can see in attachment 1, we have a breakdown of all the different components of our insurance pool. And then in attachment 2, you can see what the breakdown is on coverage in those different pieces of insurance, like all property and excess liability. So one thing that we're going to be doing in the next fiscal year, as a somewhat of a time-consuming process, is explore solutions like Joint Powers Insurance Authority, something like Aquos, that maybe we don't know until we look into it, but those may provide us with some more advantageous pricing. But at this point, we're joined by Seth Cole, a senior vice president at Alliant, and Matt McManus, who's a first vice president at Alliant. And I was going to turn it over to those gentlemen to talk to you about some of the market conditions that they're experiencing with other customers. We're certainly not alone in this, and talk to you a little bit about some of the thought that's gone into putting these premium selections together.
I know. Before we do that, Chuck, a question for you. Have we, given the magnitude of the increases here, have we done any research on competitors out there? What have we done to just check out, what might be available?
Yeah, Alliant director has looked at the competition and received bids on these to see where we can be competitive. We as staff have asked the questions about, an alternative like a JPIA. It's something that we didn't have enough time this year to get that together for this selection, but it's something that we're going to look at next year. And I think that's really probably our biggest alternatives, unless we start thinking about things like, how much actual excess liability insurance we have. My understanding is that we stepped those limits up substantially in previous years. We can also look at, what our self-insured retentions are. So if we start increasing those, we may be able to, well, we would save some money on premiums. But again, all of those kind of options are, really discussions of trade-offs of risk.
Okay.
Of course, Chuck, since we have no way of judging the risk, it's just, a pig in the poke on all sides, huh? Including the insurance company side.
Yeah, as director, there is a bit of that. I mean, we can go back and look at our history and try to gauge what our past experience has been. But as somebody pointed out to me, that past experience isn't necessarily an indicator of what kind of insurance risk we're going to have in the future.
Well, my recollection is across the board, we have pretty high deductibles as well. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, our self-insured retention on the excess liability is $500,000. And I think that was stepped up last year from, if I remember, I think it was at $250,000. So yeah, that's very substantial. And then you can see the deductibles are spelled out in attachment 2, and yes, they are high. For our all risk deductible for properties $1 million. So yes, we do have pretty high deductibles on these.
What was our total claim history last year?
I don't know what our claim history was off the top of my head.
I think we had one claim that we recovered from, but I'd have to check to verify. I know we had at least one claim that pierced the $250,000 SIR, that self-insured retention. I don't know of any more recent than that one since I've been here.
So that likely wouldn't have exceeded the 500,000. Huh?
Correct. We have none that I've known of.
Not this past year, but a couple of years ago, you did have one liability case that we're aware of that did pierce the $500,000 level. But knock on wood, your loss history has been relatively good, which is a good thing, of course.
So I notice our general liability limits were cut in half from, I think, 5 million to 2 million. So does the excess policy pick up the difference?
And how your program is currently structured is you have 25 million in excess of $500,000. We do have proposals so far for that first $5 to $10 million, but that is also excess of a $500,000 self-insured retention. I'm just looking at the schedule now to my right, and I'm not sure I'm seeing where it's been reduced to 2 million, but I might be missing it on here.
It's on page 10 of your presentation under general liability limits, present coverage 5 million, proposed coverage 2 million.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna page 10, so let me scroll to that real quick. So on page, I think that might be oh yeah, so yeah, so okay, I see what you're Director Bragman, I see exactly what you're looking at. Yeah, so Safety National Insurance Company structures their policies a little bit differently. How they structure it is they have multiple different coverage parts, and they provide what they call a primary limit of $2 million. And then they provide on the following page, page 11, a $3 million excess for a total of $5 million. So they just structure the way their policies work a little bit differently, but it would still be the $5 million in total for that first layer of excess coverage. Since we put together this draft proposal, we did receive on Friday quotes from Great American Insurance Company at both a 5 million limit and a 10 million limit, and they actually are more competitive than the Safety National quote. So we're working feverishly on your behalf or the district's behalf to kind of build up the limits to 25 because Great American appears to be a better option or will be a better option for the district, but we do not have those excess layers finalized at this point.
Okay, but you're making sure we don't have a gap from the 5 million
Absolutely not. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we are not. Yeah, you will not have a gap. We'll make sure that you have continuous coverage all the way up to 25 million as an option.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Chuck, did you want me to go into, or any of the directors, do you want me to go into the insurance market a little bit and what's driving some of this, what we call chaos in the market right now?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So you might recall last year that we started to see some premium increases, right? And that's where the market kind of, you had a 250,000 self-insured retention on your excess liability, and the market pushed that up to 500,000. So we were in the beginning stages of what we call a hard market, where things were starting, we were starting to see capacity diminish a little bit in the market and seeing premiums increase. And the root cause of that are a couple of different things. There's a couple of different areas where insurance companies are experiencing significant losses. One is on the property side, natural catastrophes, insured natural catastrophes. 2020 was the fifth worst year on record. And if you go back and look at the last 5 years, 3 of the last 5 years are 3 of the worst years ever on history for the insurance industry. And that's due to flooding, hurricanes, and in California, wildfires. We've had significant wildfires in California the past several years, and they're not easing up, unfortunately. It used to be that the insurance carriers, the insurance industry would gear up for wildfire season. Now it seems like there is no season. It just seems like it's always wildfire season. And that's got insurance companies very concerned. And that's really what's driving the property insurance market and why we're seeing the premium increases on the property side. You're seeing a lot of insurance companies exit the market in California on the property side because they're worried about wildfire risk. On the excess liability side, it's this whole notion of, you may have heard social inflation, where you have these runaway jury verdicts, or even they're called nuclear jury verdicts, and these increased settlement values. California is a very litigious state, and where it's not uncommon to see 7- and 8-figure settlements for auto accidents, things of that nature. I mean, fortunate for you, for this group, is that you don't have, you're not a municipality and you don't have police officers and road design issues and things of that nature, because they're actually having, cities and municipalities are having a much more difficult time with their renewals on the excess liability side. And as Chuck had mentioned, Argonaut, who is the carrier who'd been the lead carrier on your excess liability program for a number of years, had decided to call it quits a couple of months ago in California, and just said, we're no longer going to write any insurance in the state of California, which created a big hole in the market to fill. They were the leader in providing commercial excess liability insurance for water utilities, not only in California, but across the country. And so that's created a big void in the market. We only have 2 markets, Safety National and Great American, who are willing to quote at a $500,000 or $1 million self-insured retention. The remaining markets all require a $2 million self-insured retention on the excess liability, which is, quite frankly, a lot that's a lot of risk for the district to take. And you probably wouldn't realize a whole much premium savings as a result. So that's a lot of what's driving the excess liability market. And then we have the cyber. The cyber market is the other market that's been hit extremely hard. And that's just a direct reflection of the ransomware attacks we've seen. I think what's kind of the camel, or the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, was that Colonial Pipeline hack that really got insurance companies worried that anyone can get hacked on a major scale. And so that market has also dramatically been impacted. I don't know if any of you might remember, there was in the last quote unquote hard market that we had was in the early to mid 80s. So this is the most difficult insurance market that we've seen in nearly 40 years. Back in the 80s, there's a very famous Time Magazine cover page, an article. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. It says, the cover says, "Sorry, America, your insurance has been canceled." And what that meant was public agencies could no longer get insurance, i.e. America, taxpayers, right? The public agencies were not insurable in the early to mid 80s. And we're not quite there yet, but things are very challenging and difficult like they were in the 80s. And Chuck had mentioned looking at joint powers insurance authorities as potential options, all those JPAs that you hear about, Aqua JPIA and others, they were all formed in the early 80s, mid 80s, because of the hard market insurance conditions. Public agencies just couldn't get insurance, so they banded together and they shared risk and bought whatever coverage they could together on a group purchase basis. We're seeing a lot of public agencies looking at joint powers insurance authorities as potential alternatives to the commercial market, because at some point it gets to a point where you're taking a lot of risk and you're paying a lot of premium, and perhaps a joint powers insurance authority, again, like Aqua JPI, might be a good option for you to explore, and we can help staff with that process. So that's kind of a very quick overview of some of the things that are driving the insurance market, and they're having this profound effect on the district's insurance program. And if anyone has any questions about anything specifically in the proposal, if anyone has questions about the market or anything else, Matt and I are happy to take those.
Okay, do we have any board comments on this item? This is an approval item.
Only other question, are the carriers you're lining up admitted carriers?
Most, but not all. Some of the lines of coverage, the admitted markets aren't offering coverage to public agencies in California. So some, but not all.
Okay.
And one of the important things that we look at, and that's a very good point that you brought up, Director Bragman, is that which is key to look at is an insurance company's financial strength, i.e. their ability to pay claims. So we look at two different metrics. We look at AM Best, which is a financial strength rating agency for insurance companies, and we also look at their S&P ratings. So we want to ensure that they are financially sound if they are not admitted carriers. And really what a non-admitted carrier means, some of you may be familiar and others not, is that they're not regulated by the state. And so when you're regulated by the state, you must have your policy forms approved before you can use them. You have filing requirements, and you can participate in the SIGA fund, which is called the California Insurance Guarantee Fund. And a portion of the premium that you pay goes into that fund. The insurance companies have to fund that. I caution, though, that while the SIGA is there, and if a company ever went into receivership, it would, there would be some benefit to the district. However, it's usually pennies on the dollar. I mean, realistically, it's usually pennies on the dollar. Depending on the line of coverage, it's capped generally at $500,000. And so while there is some protection there, it's not as much protection as you might think or hope.
Okay.
In this market, you want to make sure you have the largest panel of carriers, whether admitted or non-admitted, to be able to leverage against each other to find the best coverage and premium. Unfortunately, the two lines of coverage that we speak today that have these large increases are liability, where we don't have a lot of options, and property, that we don't have a lot of options. So we hope that we're staring back at you next year with more carriers entering the market. The market hopefully is softened a little bit, but we're having these hard conversations every day. We're battling in the market. Our trade partners, who are the carriers, I mean, they're receiving submissions 10x fold. So they're busy working, really working hard. It's just very, very challenging out there for everyone involved in this marketplace.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no, I don't want to hurry everybody along, but we have 88 people here participating I think mainly on the next two items. So if there aren't any further board comments on this, I'm going to call for a motion and then ask for public comments.
I'd move approval.
Second.
Okay, Terry, any public comments on this item?
I just see one. I believe it's Mr. Roger Roberts.
Roger?
Question, earthquake insurance?
So I can, Seth Go here, I can answer that. So the district does not currently purchase earthquake coverage. The district every couple of years evaluates it and does a cost benefit analysis. And based on the cost, it has been deemed cost prohibitive the last couple of times that the district has reviewed it. But we'll continue to review it with the district and, to see if it makes sense financially for the district.
That's all I have.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Can you do a roll call vote, please, Terry?
Yes, Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
President Kohler.
Aye. Thank you. We're now going to move on to item 6, which is the drought update. And then for those attending, I just want to make it clear, item 6 is an update. That's an information item that will be followed with a public hearing. So in the interest of time, you're of course welcome to make any public comments you'd like, but to avoid people repeating themselves, if you have comments that you'd like to make in the public hearing, you may want to wait till that item. If you want to comment on the information presented in the drought update, you're of course welcome to, but again, we have a lot of people attending, so please be mindful of not repeating yourself if you don't need to. And you don't need to repeat yourself. We heard you. We will hear you the first and the second and the 10th time. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben to do the drought update.
Yeah, I think Lucy.
Okay, good evening, Board of Directors. Let's see, up on the screen, we've got the drought update tonight. So tonight we're going to follow the typical format of our drought updates, starting off with an update of our water supply and drought conditions. And then we'll move into an update on our drought response, including our water supply initiatives, as well as our public outreach and communications surrounding the drought. And then we will move into a discussion building off the last board meeting, considering additional conservation actions if they're necessary. So first, starting off with our water supply and drought conditions is up on the screen. Our total reservoir storage, this has been updated up through just through today. So tracking very familiar lines. The green line is 2021, so our current storage. We are just now around 37,600 acre feet, which is about 47% of total capacity. This is the dark line up here, which is a bit hard to see right now. This top line, this is our average, and from this line, we're about 53% of normal. So we're quite a bit below where we would hope to be for this date. And on an upcoming slide, I'll be showing projections that will be extended through December 2022. So as we've talked about in previous meetings, our storage currently is just about the lowest going into the summer months that we've seen with our total reservoir capacity. So the 79,000 acre feet that we have in our total reservoir system. This orange line showing, orange bar chart showing our total capacity this year at just around 37,000 acre feet going into June, which is significant because we don't expect much rain or any rain really until probably about October or November at the earliest. And the average for this time of year would be more around 70,000 acre feet. So quite a bit above that. So these lines are our projected reservoir storage. The black line showing our actual reservoir storage since January 2020 and its decline over the last 18 months or so. And then turning into quite a few dashed lines at this point. And as you can see, we've now extended this chart out through December 2022. So quite a bit of time shown here and projections for reservoir storage. So the dashed blue line is our reservoir storage that is expected through the fall, given our demand that we've seen over the last few years without any restrictions. And that's through about October, just at the beginning of October. And then at that point, we move into about 4 different scenarios. So the lower orange line is our 25% of average rain. The blue dashed line would be 50% of average rainfall. And then the green dashed would be average rainfall. So if we were to get average rainfall, we would see probably around March or April a little bit maybe around 54,000 acre feet. We would hope for that, you know. And then I put 150,000, I mean, I had 150% back on the chart now that we're showing out through December 2022, really just to see if we could possibly max out. I mean, this is a very probably low chance of it happening, but at that point we could see total capacity hit again in that scenario. So quite a range here. And really what this is showing is there's not much known at this point, I would say. Quite a bit of uncertainty and planning for any kind of future at this point. The solid blue line right here that's extended is a scenario that's based off the blue dash line, and that is, it incorporates the 40% of conservation savings that we have, that the board has adopted and is targeting for the customers. So if our demand meets the 40% conservation savings, we would expect our storage to look more along this solid blue line rather than the dashed line. So that shows the impact is quite a bit over this 18-month period. Rainfall, not much has changed in the last 6 weeks or so. The last time we received any rain was the middle of April. Rainfall is still about 20.6 inches at the end of May. And this is now about 39% of average that we would expect for this time of year, just kind of closing out the end of the rainy season, and still quite a bit lower than the 76, 77 rainfall period. It doesn't look like, yeah.
I'm interrupting you. Lucy,
Yeah.
just to pause there for a minute for the public. I think if you could talk a little bit more about that, because that is the thing that is a little bit different and trending in I think for the board and everybody else, a very challenging direction. I mean, I've never seen a chart like that, you know, being that far below 76, 77, which is considered the drought of record. So if you just want to take a minute and talk about that significance, because that is a big gap from what we thought was, you know, a floor.
Right. It is quite a big, it's quite a big gap even from 77, 76 from what we could have hoped. And really the impact is that it's building off this 1920. So having these 2 years back to back, it's very similar to the 76, 77 drought, and having such a low rainfall has severely impacted our storage, and then shows kind of the storage amounts that I just showed on the previous slides. So we're seeing that over these two, the yellow line and the green line put together, it's one of the longest, most severe droughts, kind of, you know, just in about 18 months, very minimal rainfall.
It also, I guess, obviously suggests this could be a tough fire season as well. Things are so dry, right? So they haven't been this dry in 50 years. And beyond, you know, all the things we need, we definitely need water in the event of fire season.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben. Okay, so then moving into our potable production, this is updated just through the end of yesterday. So looking at through the end of May, we did see a considerable drop in our production. So the amount of water that our treatment plants produced, which is based on the demand that our customers, how much demand our customers are pulling from the system. So in comparison to 2020, this yellow line right here, it's about a 10% decrease. And in comparison to the 3 years, it's about a 5%, you know, this average, because in 2020, we saw that, you know, every month over month, it was quite a significant jump due to COVID and due to quite a bit more people at home. So there's still a little bit of variability in May, and we expect it to even out in June and July. But it was quite significant to see the drop in the production over the course of May and kind of what we had seen with the weekly production numbers. So then moving into another chart, in an effort to look at our actual water use in comparison to baseline water use, we started to pull together a more weekly water use graph that can be used. The blue is really is showing our 2021 actual water use, so how much our treatment plants are producing, as a good metric of understanding how much water is getting pulled from the system and the demand from our customers. So it's been pretty flat over since May, the beginning of May, which is when the mandatory restrictions went into effect. And then the orange line up here is our baseline water use, which is a 3-year average of water use over this period. So looking at May through July 31st, this is about the 3-year average of water use. So really what we want to see first and foremost is that this blue area stays under the orange line, so that our current demand, our current actual water use stays below the orange baseline. So that's good, that's positive. And then this green dashed line is the targeted 40% reduction. So taking that baseline water use and then reducing it by 40%, where does that take us? And putting that out towards July, we really want to see that this blue starts to move towards the green. And that's kind of the goal here, is really starting to move our demand lower and lower so that we can extend our water supply.
Do we still have any raw water users?
We do have, I believe it's just one raw, but they are also under the same restrictions, the mandatory restrictions.
Okay.
So.
And is raw water included in this?
Yes, it is included.
Okay.
Are the dairy people taking any water yet?
I can take that one, Lucy, if you'd like. Yes, Director Russell, they have taken some water, but they were finding that the hydrant that we provided was taking quite a bit of time to fill their truck. So they, I think, have moved to a different location at this point. But we'll be reporting back on that periodically.
So that's another raw water user is what my point was.
Mm-hmm.
Good point.
Okay, so this difference right here is really our water savings, what we're considering our water savings. So this difference between the orange line and the blue line, and tracking that difference. So moving it from the orange down to the green would be 40% ultimately. And moving into that, you see that this line tracks pretty closely with that difference, so that gap between the orange line and the blue area that I just showed. And so what we're showing is that since the beginning of May or just the end of April, we've seen the water savings between our current demand and the baseline is about 4, it's varied, but just this past week was about 8.9%. So I think it depends a little bit on temperature, it depends as the word gets out and more, but we're seeing quite a little bit more impact as we move along in time. So these are a couple just different graphics to show what we're seeing as we move forward.
Could I ask one other question, Lucy?
Yeah.
What is the baseline figure? What does that represent?
So this orange line right here?
Yes.
So that's the 3-year average. That's 3-year average, so 2018 through 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're doing, just if I could, Lucy, is every week. So these are weeks on the axis across. every week we're looking at the 3-year average of that week and how much water we consume relative to that. And our goal is 40% below that 3-year average of that weekly consumption.
Okay, that makes sense.
So not necessarily a chart, moving it towards a little bit something different. This is now a weekly water savings tracker. So translating that graph I just showed you into more of a visual for our customers that can be frequently updated each week, as Ben mentioned. So this is the weekly water savings tracker that we've been working on. And the idea behind this is really that it will get posted to social media and to our website and beyond. And it will really start to communicate with our customers on how we're doing with respect to this target. So trying to get this savings more towards the goal of 40% or more, really trying to save as much as we can. So trying to put metrics out there and communicate as clearly as we can.
So Lucy, just so that I understand, so the 2%, that means that we really have only moved 2% towards our conservation goals since when? Since the beginning of since when we declared mandatory restrictions, since February? Since when?
So for the week prior, so on the slide I just showed, it was this 2% right here.
Okay.
So we were showing this week right here, and what we expect is, I had just pulled this today and didn't have time to update the tracker, but we would expect that next week the publishing would be 9%. And we hope over time this would kind of consistently build on itself, showing that a more steady state and that it won't vary so much.
Is that what we would normally be looking at as our production, water production? Is that where we get that number?
Yes.
Yeah,
that's correct.
I suggest we consider opening every meeting with this chart.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think, since we've been calling for conservation measures since February, I think having that as a baseline, and maybe I'm just not understanding the chart before, would be useful to just see where we've been since February.
Okay.
It's a good idea.
Yeah.
And probably putting it on the homepage of our website, so it's right there.
I think we might consider making the below goal red instead of blue.
Yeah.
We're hoping we don't have to go there.
Right.
Well, we're already there, aren't we? That's my point. I mean, like, I think where we are should be red, and then maybe orange, and then yellow, coming into the goal, huh?
So only have it green if it's above 40.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
So then moving into a few updates on our water supply initiatives. The pumping at Suluhuli Reservoir has been ongoing since the beginning of May, and that water has been started to be conveyed on over to Nicasio Reservoir. Last meeting, the board moved ahead with a contract awarded to Carollo for the design and engineering for the Castania pump station rehabilitation, and that project is rapidly moving ahead as well. And then with the environmental releases, staff is continuing to meet with resource agencies and stakeholders to continue those discussions about the drought conditions, as well as proceed with the technical study to look at flow under critically dry conditions. And then with consideration of our multi-year drought projects, that's been ongoing as well, really looking at if we are to go into another dry year and drop into that 25 or 50% of average rainfall, staff will be bringing back an item to the next board meeting on June 15th, a discussion item that will be updating updating the board on the progress there, looking at feasibility of temporary desalination and water transfers. So at this point, I'm going to now hand it off to Jeannie, our Manager of Public Information and Communications.
Thank you, Lucy. Good evening, everybody. So since we just did a comprehensive outreach update, we wanted to keep tonight's update pretty brief in consideration of the agenda. But before we do that, just to refresh that our ongoing outreach campaign does include customer direct communications, things like bill inserts, customer newsletters, our e-news, and the direct mailer that just went out. We also have an extensive social media campaign with more than 250 posts across all platforms. And we continue to see really strong news coverage, which is so helpful in getting the word out. We like to see that it is not just local, but regional, national, and international. Our stakeholder outreach is also going strong, and we continue to get requests, and we'll continue to do that and work with various groups, chambers, rotaries, and towns to make sure that we're also getting our information into their newsletters. And of course, we have our public awareness conservation campaign that's been running and continues through August. So with that, you see if you could change it. So we have several programs coming up, and we wanted to highlight just a couple here. We have our Drought Drive Up event on June 12th. And this is an event where people can come and get buckets with water efficient fixtures, as well as lots of great information on conservation. And so this is part of a collaborative effort with the Sonoma Marin Saving Water Partnership. So this will be going on at other places in the North Bay in particular. So our locations are listed here. We'll have one at our offices in Corte Madera, and then Mill Valley and San Rafael as well. Also launching this week is our Super Savers program. And what this is really just a way to feature our customer stories about how they conserve and to share that across our social media platforms and on our website. So the next slide. So we continue to do sector-specific outreach and collaborate with businesses. So what you see here is some of the work going on with restaurants. We recently provided updated table tents that save water on request. We also did some updated conservation materials for hotels. And our conservation team continues to work with car washes, large water users, and we're seeing an increase in leak notifications as well. So we launched a new slate of programs, conservation rebate programs in early May. And as you can see here, we really spent some time pushing out that flume rebate. And in less than a month, we had 540 rebates for flume. So really good numbers there. And our turf rebate program just launched today, and we're looking forward to spreading the word on that one as well. So as you can see from the chart, calls and emails continue to grow since we first declared a drought in February. I think they've grown tenfold now or so, with 1,220, and water waste reports also continue to increase. So trends are going in the right direction, and we're really busy. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Lucy.
Just before you go back, I just want to take a minute. I don't know if everybody else received it, because I know the bulk mail, means people receive information from the district at different times. But our household received our brochure from the district this weekend, and I thought it was really well done. We've been hearing from a number of people who have come to the meetings that they're just not getting enough information. And I think the direct mailer to the households, it's never going to be just one thing. But I thought it was really effective. I thought it was really well done. And I want to congratulate the team for putting it together.
Thank you.
I agree completely with Cynthia. I've even had clients call me and ask questions about the information. So they're reading it, which is great. A suggestion I think we should pass on to the two car washes. There's a Union 76 and a Shell station over by the North Gate shopping center that have recycled water. I think we should either give them a banner, or they should have a banner saying that they're using recycled water, because they don't say anything about it. And the guys that are there, I don't know if they even know that that's happening, but either that or you should print it on the receipt or something like that. I mean, there's real potential to improve their business, and to tell people this is the place to go. We listed on our webpage. That's how I found them. But you know, there should be a sign that said it's like okay to wash your car here or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. I think this is a great idea, Jeannie. You know, I think for all of the car washes that are using recycled water in the district, I mean, there aren't that many. I mean, it
There's
probably
only two. Just these two.
Really? What doesn't the one in Mill Valley use recycled water? No.
Well, they all internally recycle, but these two actually use treated wastewater for their water supply.
Yes, so the ones we list on the website use either recycled water or reused water. So we do have a list, and if you ever hear of any, just give us a holler and we'll be sure to update that. We're always looking to do that. That's a great way to get the word out as well, banners and other signage.
Well, I think for these two in particular, because they're the only two that are really using reclaimed water as a water source that I'm aware of. At least that's what our webpage says. So that's a big difference between recycling the water and using treated wastewater.
Right. They're the only two in the area that can use it.
Yeah, the only two that have it.
Right.
All right. So we're going back to Lucy, I think.
Yep.
Okay. So building off the initial discussion from the May 18th board meeting, we'll now be doing another discussion about the conservation actions, the additional conservation actions to consider if we need an additional for water savings over the next few months. Well, it's just been over a month since we've enacted mandatory restrictions. We're currently not seeing too much more than 9% or so are the observed savings. And it's a bit lower than the estimated savings we saw going into the mandatory restrictions. So the current measures, which is 2 days a week of irrigation. We're focusing heavily on outreach and education for our customers, especially regarding the tools available to them, regarding the conservation tools. And then if the water savings do not increase over the next few months, what we're starting to explore is really what other landscape irrigation measures are out there, and what could we get over that period. And these really, to note, it's really about what are the estimated savings. There's a lot that's unknown at this point. We would estimate, you know, going into this, we could have gotten up to 35%, and we still could, but right now we're seeing less than 10% on a given week. So for 1 day per week of irrigation, we've estimated up to 40% savings. And then 1 day per week with a designated day could be up to 45% savings. And then no irrigation of lawns could be up to 50% of savings.
Lucy, if I could, on that slide, you may have noted that I think you expressed that if we may need more savings, I think it's fair to suggest to the board that staff does believe, based on the data so far, that we should seriously be considering additional restrictions as soon as the first meeting in July, if not the next meeting in June. And going to 1 day per week with a designated day, and I have heard interest in thinking about just simply not allowing irrigation of lawns, but on 1 day per week on a designated day would provide a level of, and I know we didn't want necessarily to come out of the gate heavy-handed, yet it would provide the opportunity to help educate folks that may just simply not be getting the message. So after the next slide, I am interested to hear feedback from the board on which of these if you would like to consider in the timing for additional measures, which ones may resonate with you.
Why does designating the day give us an increase?
Right. It's a great question, and I know there was a lot of concern that I can do it. I being a customer, and I understand and respect that perspective. Having a designated day for a given city allows staff, as we are out in the field, to remind folks if they're watering on a day that's not their designated day. It also provides the benefit of neighbors noticing that one of their neighbors may be watering on an off day. So it's a very powerful tool, with the understanding that it does feel a bit controlling. But I think where we are with supply and not seeing the deep conservation signal that we're asking for and that we need, we may need to move to actions that do feel a bit more restrictive and even controlling. And the designated day really does open up an educational and, yes, an enforcement opportunity that to a large extent we don't have today.
Is the no irrigation of lawns, what does that mean in terms of frequency of other irrigation, of drip irrigation?
Yeah, so all of these, we're anticipating that hand watering would be allowed to continue, because that's the most efficient way to target very limited watering for vegetable gardens or butterfly gardens that are generally pretty small. The drip irrigation on any of these, what we would bring options to the board, probably restricted, maybe slightly at a lesser restriction than spray irrigation, something like that, I think may make sense.
But is this estimate, Ben, is in the no irrigation of lawns, estimated savings up to 50%, is that assuming that drip irrigation continues at its current measures, or is it, what frequency would drip irrigation, for example?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really based on a premise that's broad, but I think reasonable, that the dominant use of irrigation water is spray irrigation for lawns. So I think when we say up to 50%, all of this is really targeting, to a large extent, spray irrigation for lawns. And these are just estimates. Obviously, current measures, I think we initially were projecting somewhere 25 to 35%, and you can see we aren't close. So now we're saying up to, but as we push this down, I do think the lower end does start moving. We start converging the lower and the upper, particularly if the board's open, in my view, for designating the day or simply saying no irrigation of lawns. Understanding that that's a difficult decision making and would be notably impactful for folks that have lawns.
Well, I am certainly not a gardener, but I have a question here. If you're only watering a lawn one day a year, one day a week, I presume that lawn is gone. I mean, I don't think you can do that. And if that's so, then any water you're putting on the lawn for that one day is wasted water.
It's a good question. And I think staff will need to talk to some experts. My non-scientific discussion with folks, but I'm not speaking from an educated standpoint, is there would be a difference in survivability of lawns. grasses naturally, you know, in California and many places are, don't get rain at all in the summer, yet they come back in the winter. And it's a good question, and we do need to understand that.
I think in keeping with that line of inquiry, I would want to understand too, just this trade-off and what, you know, for people with gardens, and as we heard comments from the public when we were last discussing this, the impacts to other parts of landscaping. And might we be in a situation where we're basically asking folks to choose to trade off between their lawn or their other landscaping? And so I think it would be important to understand, if we had a no irrigation of lawns, would that mean that people could still drip irrigate twice a week, for example, or something like that, on the idea that they may be just frankly just choosing between one type of landscaping vegetation versus another.
Do we have the power to control where the water goes?
Well, I guess the short answer is, well, Director Russell, I'm not exactly sure of the question. I understand if
The
you're.
question is this, Ben, do we have the power to tell people where to use their water or not use the water? I mean, I think we're better off looking at their total water usage, and if they decide they want to take a bath rather than a sponge bath, then I think that's up to them. Okay, as long as they meet the goal. So the other thing, it seems to me, is we should be relying heavily on the houses with the AMI to see if we're having an impact. You know, we talked about the limitations of those houses where they're located, but I still think that data is the only data we really got that's real time, besides the total water usage.
So, I mean, Director Russell, are you basically saying that instead of attempting something like these irrigation measures, instead that there's in essence a cap on a per cap, you know, a per person per household cap of some sort?
Well, that's what yes, Monty, that's what it is when you get down to it, right? We talk about per capita per day, per person per day, you know, but the reality is it's a volume, huh? And where they wish to use the water is, I think, up to them. I understand the idea of the goal. I think that's a good idea, but I think, you know, I mean, if you had $500,000 worth of grass, you may not take too kindly to us telling you can't water your grass.
Right.
Right. Although there's no practical way that they're going to make up watering that much lawn with interior consumption reductions. So there is something unique about the amount of water it takes to spray irrigate a large lawn. And during this time of the severe water shortage we have because of this natural disaster we're in, I just believe we're going to be faced with making the sort of decisions and imposing on our customers in a way that you know, it isn't what we would typically do or want to do. But Lucy, why don't we go to the next slide?
Can I just make one quick point before we do?
Yeah.
And I think the points that directors Russell and Schmidt are making really go to, and this is a longer term conversation, but I think we should put this on the table, you know, for that conversation. You know, what you're really talking about only works if we go to budget-based rates. And I think we should in the longer term. We can't do that immediately, but I think the points you're making are really valid, but the current rate structure doesn't really allow for that in a way that works for the staff or for us as a board. But I do think it really demonstrates, you know, because I think you guys are making, I mean, I agree with you in concept, but we have to go to a different rate structure for that to be feasible. And that's budget-based rates.
So next slide, Lucy. So staff is thinking, right, it's not only targeting landscaping. Of course, this next item, we're looking at new connections. And then we are working and thinking about allocations that possibly that would be actions that we'd be looking at in the November, December timeframe, where there's kind of two choices. One is a per capita, gallons per person per day, and that gets into the challenge, but we're going to be putting pen to paper and bring it back to the board, the challenge of knowing how many people are in each connection, in each home or residence. And the other alternative is every connection has a mandated reduction from their baseline water use, kind of what we're doing system-wide. It would be more granular, and there would be penalties if they exceed that. It feels potentially that the focus on irrigation is a good first step, taking additional action before we move to one of these. These where staff is thinking at this point that this action would be if we're seeing, you know, more signs that the drought could extend into the coming year.
So over the next few months, what we've started to lay out is kind of an idea behind actions and different steps. So in June is the consideration to suspend new connections, which is on the agenda for tonight, the next item, as well as continuing to monitor water savings and report back to the board. In July, one route would be to adopt additional water use restrictions, such as we just presented with the additional irrigation restrictions, or and finding a way to also reach out to our customers more and more and get that buy-in and try to achieve the 40% savings needed over the coming months. And then August through October, we would continue conservation messaging and monitoring and reporting of water savings. And then, as Ben mentioned, in November, December, consider allocation of water, so either per capita or per household, and consider how we would go about that, depending, of course, on the water savings that we're achieving, and come November, December, what the weather outlook is seeming to look like. So before I move on, I did want to just stop here and see if there were any other comments on either this slide or the previous two with the additional conservation actions.
So specifically, what staff is thinking that the next board meeting, we would bring kind of a straw person framework of additional conservation measures for the board to give us feedback and refine for potential action at the first meeting in July.
Good plan.
I think that's a great plan, Ben. I just want to, I think that I'm not a landscape expert by any means, but I think we're part of focusing on the irrigation options that we've just discussed. It would be really helpful to just understand from the perspective of somebody who is an expert in landscape irrigation, you know, the questions, you know, can you keep a lawn alive with 1 day a week or not? If you are, you know, trying to keep other landscape plantings alive with, you know, with irrigation of 1 day a week or 2 days a week, you know, can we do that? I think understanding what the actual impacts are, because it seems like no matter what, there's going to be an impact on outdoor landscaping. And I think our goal is to maximize savings and minimize impacts. And so it'd be really helpful when we have that discussion next week, have the benefit of somebody who knows far more than me about that.
Okay, do you want to go to the next slide, Lucy?
Yep. Okay, so the next steps are to continue our outreach and our operational water supply projects, as well as continuing to monitor and report back to the board, especially compared to our established conservation goals. And then, as we mentioned, we'll bring back the additional conservation measures, the irrigation measures that we talked about tonight. And as Ben mentioned, looking towards a beginning of July proposed date. So thank you.
Okay, I know the board has been making comments along, but I want to make sure we've heard from the board before we open the public hearing, and then I'll go to public comment. Okay, Terry, do we have any public comments on this item?
Yes, one so far, Robin Miller.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for allowing me to comment, and in listening to the board and staff discuss and going round and round about the landscaping. Just one thought and comment. I represent Truemark Homes, which is one of the builders that may or may not be affected by board's actions this evening, but I wanted to comment just a suggestion in effort to maybe provide a different perspective on how to be more effective or just broaden the reach for the irrigation discussion, and how to conserve more water and how to get a hold of more people in a shorter time frame. And that would be maybe outreaching to the various landscape maintenance companies, as well as the homeowners associations that do have larger groups amounts of landscaping, and starting to ask for their help in imposing conservation efforts, focusing on drip irrigation or reducing the amount of watering and whatnot. That way, getting to more households and more landscaping in a shorter period of time. And the other element of my suggestion would be there's a lot of people in Marin County, some with larger properties and less household sizes and whatnot, going for the per capita effort, and possibly going down to 1 day a week in landscaping is basically asking the various homeowners or homeowner associations to basically forfeit the lawn and incur that cost whenever the water conservation effort is over, as well as their landscaping, which is a very costly and one of the highest homeowners association dues, and where a lot of their funding goes to. So by asking a lot of people to do it 1 day a week, basically they're going to do the economic calculus of how much will my penalties be versus how much will it cost to replace that lawn. And in some cases, they may just incur that. If you were to try to get the best outcome and performance out of your customers, reducing it to 2 or 3 days a week, there might be a chance of survival and more participants. And those are just my two initial thoughts in listening to all of this, in effort to try to make the most effective use of the decisions made by the board. Those are my just two comments as listening to everyone go and discuss this. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Ben, do you want to provide a response to that, or have Lucy?
Yes, thank you, Robin. We have been, it's a great comment about reaching out to homeowners associations, and we have been actively reaching out, but we may not have reached all yet. So we look forward to reaching out to all of them over the coming months. So
I think I would just add that I agree with the commenter. The challenge is that given the severity of this drought and the fact that we can't look into the future and know if it's going to continue or continue to exacerbate, we can be in a position where we have very, very little water going into the next water year. And we won't even be talking about landscape at that point. We'll just be talking about getting water to people to live. So that's, I just share with you that that's the situation we're in right now. We're managing to make sure that when we hit 2022, we are not out of water at all. Anyway, any other comments, Terry?
Yeah, President Kohler and members of the board, we have a total of 6 now. The first, we'll go with Baron Hamill, 7. Baron Hamill and Grace Garrity, please.
Hi, thank you again for listening to us as we reach out for opportunities for communicating how to save water. I think this lawn irrigation question is an important one, but how will it be communicated to people? Obviously, we need to get out there with a stronger communications campaign. Forgive the pun, a grassroots effort. And I created a slogan called Each One Reach One, so that people are sharing the information amongst each other. I'm listening to you talk about not having water a year from now, and I don't hear the hair on fire approach to communicating this, that there needs to be a greater sense of urgency. And I've been saying this repeatedly at each of the meetings that we've been available to see, and more has to be done. I'm doing what I can. I had a meeting today, I had 65 people in it. I took the Flume sent a newsletter out. I shared it with 122 people on my water email list. I'm getting to the point where each one of my participants is now sharing it with other people. So my reach out is extending fast and quickly and going beyond the one and then another and another. It's a pyramid at this point. So I think that there needs to be a greater sense of urgency in what's being communicated and how. This is big red print headline news. Drought is here. No, drought is here and we have to do something about it now. It needs a more urgent communication message. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for the comment.
Next, Miss Grace Garrity. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yes, thank you for taking my comment. I'm constantly hearing about lawns and lawns and lawns, and we live in Terra Linda. We have a vegetable garden, and we really not only feed ourselves, but we actually feed some of our neighbors, and depending on how much, we also give to different food groups. So I don't understand. I can tell you, we will not survive with our tomatoes and squash, etc., irrigating 1 day a week. And I don't have a lawn. I've got rocks in my front yard. So that's one thing. And you need to start thinking about that. And what are you going to do with clients like us? And we're not the only ones. And then secondary, everyone here has mentioned that you're unsure of what's going to happen in the future. I don't know why, because climate scientists have been and are currently forecasting basically a dust bowl for the next 10 years in the West. So why is this such a surprise? And why are you constantly thinking that something is going to change? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just take a quick response before I ask the team to respond. We're not at all surprised about climate change. We're not saying we're surprised at all. What we're saying is that we can't say with precision how much water we're going to have in the immediate future. I'll just speak for myself. We certainly agree that climate change means that drought will be more frequent and more severe. It doesn't mean that we will have endless drought, right? What climate change really, at least the data that I've seen shows, is that we will have more frequent, more severe droughts, but we will also have periods of very intense rain as well. So I believe, and I should really let Lucy respond, when we say we're uncertain, what we mean is that this year, we don't know how much rain we will get in the fall, or if we will get any rain at all. So just to be clear about that, we are entirely with you on the challenges that we face with climate change. So Lucy, do you want to respond to the rest of the questions here that were raised? No?
Yes, I think that was right on the nail about climate change. It's really what we're forecasting over the next year and trying to minimize the impact to our customers in the long term. So trying to find the water supply over the next year. We hope that we don't enter the a third dry year, which would be pretty remarkable and pretty never encountered before, which will happen at some point, but we don't want to go there yet. So that is my response. And there was a first part of the question.
Right. The other issue was can you hear me? The other issue was vegetable gardens as opposed to lawns. I believe that we have exemptions for hand watering for vegetable gardens.
Well, we do currently, and I'd expect in this next move that to potentially be maintained, that exemption. I do think it's important to note that whether it's a vegetable garden, a small lawn, a small pool, butterfly garden, wanting to spray wash your house before you paint it. All of those individually are absolutely very small uses. Collectively is what we're after, and that's where we get the savings we need. And I just, it seems to me, based on where we are and the data we're seeing, we're going to need to work with our customers to make increasingly hard choices.
The next two speakers I have, Paul Kafitz and Jenny Silva. Mr. Kafitz?
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yes, sir.
Yes. We're talking about existing users letting their landscaping die, letting their lawns die, having a 1 day a week schedule so it's convenient for narco cops to look over the fence, for neighbors to narc out their neighbors. Yet we're talking about the MMWD still committing itself to 1,350 condos in Northgate, to a couple of thousand users at the Strawberry Seminary project, so you can get millions of dollars for new hookup commitments, even though you don't know whether in the year or two when those projects would come online, whether you're going to have any water available. That is outrageously unfair. The comments in the discus column in the IJ and in Nextdoor have indicated that tens or scores of people are outraged at the inconsistency between scrapping to get people to make conservation sacrifices, yet MMWD.
Go ahead, sir. I think we lost.
Selling hookups to new. Hello?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. You really have to do a moratorium on new hookups and not leave dollar bailouts so that money can be put into pie in the sky future conservation funds so that rich developers can simply buy their way out of hookup bans. The hookup ban has to be unequivocal and simple and absolute. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we are going to discuss this in the next item, so I'm going to ask the staff to defer until we get to that, but thank you for the comment.
Miss Jenny Silva.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. as I was watching the presentation and saw that one of the suggestions was a percentage of reduction in water usage of all customers, I just wanted to remind you that not all Marin residents have lawns, not all of us have yards. Some of us are already living in situations where our only water usage is internal usage on low, on water efficient appliances. And so I'd have some concerns about how that is implemented. Folks that are already using very little water shouldn't be subject to the same reductions as people that have large lawns. And I know we'll talk about this later, so I won't say much, but I will just say that for me, as a Marin resident, I think our housing shortage is extreme. We're in a crisis, and it really outrages me that we are prioritizing lawns over people. Every one of my students, my children's teachers, commutes from Richmond, from Forestville, from Santa Rosa, and we desperately need housing. I don't see stopping housing as a solution to our current day shortage. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Ben, can you clarify that we are not asking for people who are already very much limited in their water use to conserve in the same way we're asking for people who are using more water? Or Lucy, whoever's the right person.
Right. The comment, I believe, was referencing the future actions, and we talked about the two options being a per capita allocation or a mandatory percentage reduction. Built into that, and staff has been thinking about this quite a bit, we anticipate would be some allowance for kind of super savers that are already hitting the mark. And we do understand there's a fair number of our customers that just by their very nature conserve water and have even stepped it up further now. So all the savings that's done is appreciated, and we're absolutely going to do our best to, and I expect we will take into account those that are now at very low usage, were we to move to that allocation model.
I think the key point here, Ben, is that people are missing is it's not important to get hung up in the numbers. What's important to get hung up in is the concept of using the least amount of water you can. My wife and I have a fair size house on a fair size lot. We're still using less than 35 gallons a day. That's by taking the water that uses to heat the shower up, which we only take once a week, but still produces enough water to flush the toilets. So, you know, we get double use of all the water that we can. And that's really the key here is don't feel that we're after you or we're trying to do something for you against you. What we're trying to do is something for us. And the goal here is to use the smallest amount of water you can and get by. That's the key. It isn't that we're after somebody or it's I have rocks on my grass or on my lawn and I don't have that's grass. That's great. But you still need to do more. You need to do the best you can do. That's the key to this success. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and I think just to respond to the speaker quickly, I think we absolutely agree. I don't see any situation in which this board is going to treat every water user in the service area the same way. We know that there are people who are already down to the bone the way that Director Russell is, and we know that there are people who are not yet there. So I just want to assure you that that is not the direction I can imagine we're going to go. Do we have any more comments on this item?
Yeah, the last three speakers, Bob Rosa, Lynn Lubomirsky, and Larry Minigis, in that order. Go ahead, Mr. Rosa.
My name is Bob Rosa. I'm a real estate agent here in Marin County, and I'd like to speak on behalf of the independent contractors. I'm not talking about corporations that have 1,300 units going in here, or 400 units here, or 150, okay? I'm speaking more on, here's a question. What is the impact that you're gonna have on issuing single-family residential water meters in the next 2 years? And how many permits did you give out in the last 3 years? Does anybody know that answer here? Do you know how many permits you've given out for single family residents this year? Does anybody have that answer? How about last year?
I'm
Or
sure
the
that's
year
something the
before?
staff can get for
Now,
you.
here's a question. What impact, if you stopped in a moratorium and stopped giving out single family meters, okay? What's the impact on the total water consumption in Marin County here? Does anybody know that answer? I think that's a question that needs to be put into consideration here. And that's why I'm talking about local contractors, the contributing contractors that live here. In Marin County, I grew up here. 30%, 35% of the people that I went to school with, they're contractors. They contribute to this community quite well. But it's just, where I'm coming from, you have large corporations that have come here in Marin County. Now, we all know that Marin County is the biggest violator in the United States as far as low-cost housing, okay? But you've got major projects coming down the pike here. And that's talking about a lot of people versus people that are single. I'm a local contractor. I got 6 men on my crew here, okay? My point is, I'd like you to take into consideration the small guy, the guy that's contributing locally in this community here, if you would. Anyway, using the term globally, think globally, act locally. Is it fair that these big corporations come here on the coattails of state and federal mandates for us and make up large profits and shut down the small independent contractors for contributing to the local economy and their families? I'm a real estate agent. Do you know how many, this list here? There's 87 on this list that are active lots in Marin County. I'm going to tell you straight up, probably less than 35% of them are buildable for the infrastructure that would cost to get you there. Okay?
Mr. Rosa, can you make your last sentence, please?
Pardon me?
Your last statement, your time is up, sir.
Okay. I think you get the point that I'm trying to make here as far as consideration, as far as local economy and the local business guys, the small guy, the guy's trying to make a dollar, trying to make it better for his family.
Thank you, sir.
Contribute to the single family residents here in Marin County.
All right,
So
thank you,
for
sir.
your time.
Thank you. I'm just going to say to the speaker, I'm going to ask the staff to defer responding because the point you're raising really goes to the next item. So we will get to it at that time, but I don't want you to think that we're not hearing you because we are.
Okay, Lynn Lubermersky, please.
Could I defer my comments till the next item because they relate to the next item?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that.
Larry Manikes, please.
Good evening, directors. It's a long evening. I'll try and be succinct and get through this. 8.9% for May is just dismal. I think we all see that. It's almost shocking that that's all that we drop by in a month. And to Director Hornstein, General Manager Hornstein's comment, strong action is going to be required because it's not the directors that are directing this, it is Mother Nature. And this is the worst drought we've had in a century. And we know that 50% of water usage in the summer is due to landscaping. And we know that the largest part of that are lawns. We are going to have to cut lawns. We have heard this in 76 and 77. There was a lot of talk about all the brown lawns everywhere. There was a lot of complaining about it, but it got us through the drought. And we're going to have to do it this time. I don't think there's really an option. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Josh Crandell would like to speak last. He's the last one. I apologize.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir.
Hi, thank you very much. I wanted to really just highlight Director Schmidt's statement talking about maximizing savings and minimizing impacts. And it seems as though conservation is going to really have the greatest impact on our near-term issue with regard to the drought and preparing for the unknown. And for us to actually be revving this up in slow motion to a per capita allocation evaluation in December seems to be sort of like a really low gear versus considering shutting down development and disrupting the local contracting community and some of the impacts that those might have, those issues. But with regard to conservation and really what we are talking about here, it seems as though we aren't really focusing strongly enough on conservation in this conversation about what really might be needed. And that seems to be driven out of a PR concern. You know, what are we asking our customers to cut back on, and whether or not they're willing to stop watering their lawns a little bit for their neighbors' sense of security, water security. And so I just really want to underline and reinforce what I think sounds like a reasonable perspective here that, again, was Director Schmitz, which is how do you maximize savings and minimize the impacts? And by impacts, I think those should be taken into account as well. Some people, the impacts on the lawn are considerable, but is it as considerable as many people's jobs? And not only contractors, but many of the other people that are involved in local services for the needed housing stock that Marin County so desperately needs as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no further speakers.
Okay, I'm gonna, in the interest of time, it's already after 9 and we have to move to the public hearing. I'm gonna bring this item to a close. And Molly, is there something in particular I need to do to open the public hearing?
President Kohler, you can allow for the presentation and then open the public hearing after the presentation.
Okay, then that is what we will do. We will have the presentation on the proposed ordinance setting forth prohibitions and restrictions on new water connections. All right, there we go. Mike, we can't hear you at all.
There we go. Okay.
Are you trying to share your screen or no?
I'm going to share my screen now that I'm unmuted myself.
Okay, thanks. I was just a little confused and getting.
Yes.
Dazed.
Okay, thank you, Zoom. Here we go. Good evening, board members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And my screen looks okay?
Yeah.
Great. Mike Bond, Director of Engineering for the Marin Municipal Water District, here to present on draft ordinance 452, prohibitions and restrictions for new water service connections during drought. So tonight, we'd like to start off with just a brief summary of some of the drought-related board actions and declarations that have occurred during this drought condition. We'll briefly review the options for new water service connections during drought, and then we'll focus on Ordinance 452, prohibitions and restrictions on new water service connections. So just briefly, a quick summary of some of the drought-related board actions and declarations that have occurred. One of the first actions was to optimize our imported water supply. This began in 2020 and was enacted in an effort to preserve our local water supply as much as possible. And in February, the board adopted Resolution 8624 requesting that our customers voluntarily reduce water use. We also began utilizing Phoenix Lake, one of our reserve reservoirs. And in February, the board directed staff to evaluate rehabilitation of the Castagna pump station to improve our imported water supply efficiency. In March, we initiated a technical analysis for alternative water release schedules during the critical drought period. And then in April, the board adopted Resolution 8630 declaring a water shortage emergency. The board also adopted Ordinance 449 implementing mandatory water conservation measures. The board followed this in May with adoption of Ordinance 450 implementing additional mandatory water conservation measures. And in May, you also directed staff to proceed with the Castania Pump Station Rehabilitation Project. In May, we also began utilizing Suluhuli Reservoir, another reserve reservoir. And in May, the board also improved enhancing drought response programs. This included providing rebates for pool covers, hot water recirculating devices, plume devices, and increasing the rebate for turf removal from $1 per square foot to $3 per square foot. And throughout this whole drought condition, our public outreach has been ongoing and extensive. So next, we'd like to just do a quick review of the options for new service connections during drought that we have been discussing with the board. At board meetings on April 16th and also on May 18th, we discussed 4 options for new connections during drought. Option 1 included continuing with our status quo, requiring that new connections continue to adhere to our water conservation and requirements. Option 2 included enacting additional landscape restrictions focusing on turf. Option 3 was a program for water demand offsets for new service connections. And option 4 included temporary prohibitions on new service connections. At the board meeting on May 18th, the board directed that we bring back on June 1st an ordinance to enact prohibitions and restrictions on new water service connections, option 4. The board also directed staff to develop a water demand offset program for consideration at a future board meeting. Subsequent to the May 18th board meeting, staff met with local representatives from local planning agencies in our service area. Some of the input and comments that we heard during those meetings was a request that a temporary prohibition include a grace period. The local planning managers also requested that we consider exempting accessory dwelling units and public projects. They also asked us to consider exempting affordable housing projects. So now we'd like to talk about Ordinance 452. The purpose of the temporary prohibition is to prohibit an increase in demand on the district's water supplies by temporarily limiting new connections during drought. And the board has taken this action, the district has taken this action twice in its history. First, the first prohibition began in April of 1973 and was in place for 5 years. The second became effective in February of 1989 and was in place for 4 years. The general prohibition on new water service connections contemplated under Ordinance 452 reads as follows: no new, additional, expanded, or increased in size water service connections, meters, service lines, pipeline extensions, mains, or other water service facilities of any kind shall be made, allowed, approved, or installed as of the effective date of this chapter, except as expressly provided herein. So next, we'd like to walk the board through the exemptions provided in Ordinance 452. The general exemptions include fire hydrants, new connections wherein the expansion of existing water service does not require payment of any additional connection fees. Connections required solely for fire protection. Public agency projects to improve facilities of that public agency, provided that no landscaping would be installed until the prohibitions have been repealed. And finally, Ordinance 452 includes an exemption for accessory dwelling units meeting the criteria of section 115640H of the district code. The most common type of ADUs meet the criteria of this code, of this section of the district code. And these include ADUs installed, newly constructed ADUs that are detached. But there are some provisions, and these include the ADU cannot exceed 1,200 square feet. The ADU or the existing single-family dwelling unit must be occupied by the owner of the property upon which the existing single-family residential unit or the ADU are located. Both the existing single-family residential unit and the ADU must comply with the district's water efficiency standards. And finally, the applicant must be a current district customer who has continuously maintained water service at the parcel for where the ADU will be constructed for at least a year. And finally, ADUs constructed with new single-family homes do not meet the criteria under 115640H. So new customers, so these are our general exemptions. As I mentioned, one of the comments we heard from the local planning managers was to include an affordable housing exemption. So the board may wish to consider adding that exemption to ordinance 452. And before you on the screen is potential additional language that could be added, which would state affordable, the exemption would state affordable housing projects where 100% of the units, with the exception of the on-site manager units required for the project, are restricted to occupancy by low-income households as defined by the Health and Safety Code. So this is potential language, if requested by the board, that could be added to ordinance 452. So now that we've talked about the general exemptions, we'd like to talk about some of the more specific exemptions. Customers wishing to connect to the district's water system have two avenues that they must go to in order to do that. And it depends on the location of the project. If your project is located adjacent to a district water main, you need to complete a water service application. If your project does not front a water main and we need to extend the water main to serve your project, you must complete and execute a pipeline extension agreement with the district in order for that to happen. So we'll address these two different scenarios next. So under ordinance 452, completed water service applications received by 4 p.m. on June 30th would be exempt. This provides a 30-day grace period. It reflects the input we received from the planning managers, but it also recognizes that when applications are this close to being complete, a lot of work has gone into the application. And so it allows for just a 30-day grace period for applicants to submit their completed application. A completed application includes a completed district gray water compliance form. If your project includes a fire sprinkler system, you must have a letter from your fire sprinkler contractor confirming the meter size. Your completed application must include documentation regarding the road moratorium status of the road in front of your development. This helps us determine the amount of the deposit. You also must pay all your fees. Ordinance 452 prohibits the installation of landscaping until the temporary prohibitions are repealed. And finally, your completed application, in order for it to be complete, must include a copy of a building permit. So you have to get the building permit from the local planning agency before your application is complete. Now, a natural question would be, how many applications are we going to get in the next 30 days? How many completed applications will we get that are for new connections that increase demand on the water system? Well, one marker might be to look back on the last 3 months. And in the last 3 months, for February, March, and April, we've received a total of 14 completed water service applications for projects that increase the demand on the water system. So next, let's talk about pipeline extension agreements. So again, this is the other avenue for customers wishing to connect to the district's water system must go through if their project does not front a district water main and the water main needs to be extended to serve your project. You need to have an executed pipeline extension agreement with the district. An example, or the most recent example of a pipeline extension agreement is the residences at Preserve subdivision located on Robin Drive in Corte Madera. This pipeline extension agreement for this 16 single-family residential development was completed in May of 2020. So that's the most recent PEA that we have. We don't get very many of these. So under Ordinance 452, board-approved pipeline extension agreements would be exempt. Ordinance 452 also has a grace period that's the same as water service applications. So completed pipeline extension agreement applications on file by 4 p.m. on June 30th would be exempt. A completed application requires all discretionary approvals from the lead agency. Under Ordinance 452, these projects would also have to defer installation of landscaping until the temporary prohibitions are repealed. Finally, even though the application is received by 4 p.m. on June 30th, approval of the pipeline extension agreement is still subject to board approval. So that covers the exemptions. Let's talk briefly about the variances. So in its discretion, the board may grant a variance from new water service connections that do not otherwise meet the exceptions described in Ordinance 452. This would include variances wherein the restrictions would cause undue hardship upon the applicant or the public, but not solely financial hardship. Another variance would occur wherein the restrictions would create an emergency condition affecting the health, sanitation, fire protection, or safety of the applicant or the public. Applicants may appeal the variance decision made by the district. So any request for variance must be submitted to the district in writing and provide sufficient detail regarding the request and the reasons for the variance. The applicant has the option of proceeding on the appeals process if they wish to do so. If they wish to appeal the district's determination on the variance, they must submit a request to the district within 30 days of the response from the district. That appeal will go to a district hearing officer, similar to the county's use of code enforcement hearing officers. The applicant may then also appeal that decision, and they may appeal the hearing officer's determination to the board of directors within 15 days of the hearing officer's determination. Finally, just some last considerations. So what is the potential additional water demand savings that might be achieved through this temporary prohibition? We're estimating that the annual savings could be in the range of 20 to 60 acre feet per year. So this is additional demand that would otherwise occur if the temporary prohibition weren't in place. And finally, the ordinance does not.
Mike, I'm sorry, can I stop you there? I'm just looking
Yes.
at the slide. Oh, I'm sorry. So you don't have this on the slide,
No.
this piece. Okay, can you just say that again? Because I think there's a lot of questions about that. I just want to make sure people grasp that.
Yes. So
Okay.
we're estimating that the additional demand that would not occur if this temporary prohibition goes into place is between 20 and 60 acre feet per year.
And for context, if I could, that's approximately 1/1000th of our annual potable demand, or 0.1%, to put that in context.
So finally, one last consideration is the ordinance 452 does not have an end date. So if the board is interested in putting a sunset into the ordinance, the board could consider providing guidance in the motion adopting the ordinance, ending the ordinance of total district reservoir storage on April 1st of 2022 is above or equal to 60,000 acre feet, which would only occur if we had above average rainfall.
And if I may on that last one, Mike, I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify that that provision isn't something that we would propose that the board insert into the ordinance, but rather that it would be guidance to staff in the motion to adopt the ordinance, so that staff had some parameters to consider as to when, what trigger would indicate bringing back reconsideration of the ordinance, whether it was time to end the ordinance and repeal it.
Why not have just a flat sunset? And if it's going to go forward beyond that, it has to be brought back to the board for reconsideration, reevaluation.
It's a good
Agreed.
it's a good question, Director Gibson. I think because there are a lot of factors potentially involved in whether or not we would want to, that the board would want to end the ordinance, and having, we certainly could, the board could certainly do that given this trigger was happening. If we could do it sooner. So we wouldn't necessarily want to tie the hands of the board. There may be other factors such as additional supply that could have an impact, so that the board may want to consider doing it sooner.
But we could do it sooner in any event, even if it had the provision you suggested.
Yeah, if I could, Molly, I think this is what staff was thinking based on the sense I was getting, but absolutely, Director Gibson, if the board would prefer to hard code this, knowing the ordinance is, you have the ability to modify it if we need to, and if we have a great December and January and want to do it sooner, or if there were unanticipated factors that we were trying to put in here as we came up with the date, albeit it's hard if we were at 60,000 acre feet April 1st to think about what would cause us not doing it. So I do think either work. It's kind of a choice of the board.
I actually think that also the date should be sooner. I mean, maybe the first meeting in January. Obviously, at that point, we could evaluate it and say, okay, we're extending it another 30 days to reevaluate it again.
I think that's the point, Director Gibson, is that really it's going to be an ongoing consideration for the board. And if we hardwire something into the ordinance, that means that we're going to have to make sure that we're, issuing the public notice, preparing other ordinances, when we want to really be talking about this on an ongoing basis, and have that flexibility to do what we need to do at any given point in time.
Well, what I want to emphasize with this is that the word temporary, that this is a temporary, we all know, but I think it's important we send a message to the community that we're not land planners. And that's not what we're doing here. We're water supply managers. And we'll leave the land planning to the professionals. And that, I think, if we have a sunset and we make this as temporary as possible, it emphasizes that fact and carries home that message better.
So
I'd like
Jack, just to provide another, so I absolutely agree with you. I think making the point that we're not land managers is important, but I think that we don't need to do that by ordinance, right? I mean, I think what we need is something parallel, just like we haven't hardwired, putting mandatory restrictions into the code. I think we need to be consistent in our approach. So I would just suggest a somewhat more flexible approach. So we have a policy, right, where, when storage is at, whatever level, 50% or 40,000 acre feet or whatever it was, that triggers a board discussion about mandatory restrictions. So I think the parallel is to do the same and to put a policy in place that says, when we reach a certain level of storage going in the other direction, we've achieved, a certain level of, rainfall or, storage, that triggers a board discussion about ending the moratorium. But I think it is challenging for staff to hardwire something that is so difficult to anticipate. So, I think, I don't think the message to the public is different between an ordinance and a policy, but I think in terms of the difficulty and the inflexibility for the staff and the board, I just think as a practical matter, it makes sense to keep these things, on a parallel level. Do you see what I mean?
I think that's the very argument I would use to say have just a date certain where we consider no complicated elements to have to consider before they bring it to the board. Just a date certain comes to the board looks at it. It doesn't get simpler than that.
I agree. I think it should be a date certain, but it is more complicated if it's an ordinance than a policy, because then just something happens without board action. And I'm just saying, I think from a good government perspective, I think it makes sense to keep this parallel with the way that we do the triggers, for action, for voluntary and mandatory actions. I think that's worked well. I think that has, put the board in a position to, have a clear, rational explanation for the public why, in the conversations I've had with members of the public and the press, the first question I got all throughout the spring is, why now? Why now? And the answer why now is because we have a policy. That's why now, because we put a policy in place that says, as of April 1st, if the conditions are XYZ, we will be considering mandatory measures or voluntary measures, whatever it is. And I think the same goes in the other direction as of, whatever date you want. I mean, I think January 1st is a little early since the rainy season won't be that far along, but whatever the date we decide, to have a policy with a trigger attached to it gives us both transparency with the public, right? It's a date certain, it's a level of storage that's certain, but it doesn't create a lot of administrative burdens and hassle in terms of what we're going to do, the way an ordinance would. So I think keeping that approach parallel to what we do on the on the shortage side, to the restricting, to the lifting of the restrictions, I just think it's administratively easier while still maintaining exactly what you're talking about, which is transparency and clarity to the public.
The parallel fails, in my opinion, because this is a much more draconian action.
I'm not sure I agree. I mean, I think asking everybody in the district to have mandatory restrictions is a pretty big deal.
But the restrictions are what we set them on. I mean, this is more impactful on the people that are going to be sitting there waiting for their permits to be approved.
They may be. I mean, one thing that, and maybe we should just go back and open the bigger conversation, but I mean, the big question is, what are we really talking about here? I mean, at least the projects that are in their pipeline so far, I mean, I don't know, maybe we can go back to the staff for that. I know they haven't had the time to do a full analysis, but I mean, I don't think we're talking about, well, I don't know. I shouldn't get there. What we've seen is 3 major projects, that are kind of lined up. And aside from that, I'm sure there are many others, but we're not seeing, well, yeah, I don't want a supposition, but I think what we're seeing is a fairly, I don't know. Ben, do you want to speak to the impacts? Because I think that's something that we're not completely clear about at this point.
Yeah, I would say that on these 2 issues, what we do with the sunset provision, and if the board's inclined to include the low income, we could, following all the comments, loop back and have further discussions on those 2 items. I think it's a matter of perspective, I suppose, on which has the greatest impact. And I suspect folks would, come in different places based on their individual circumstances.
Let me just pause here for a minute. Can I just pause for a minute? I'm sorry, Monty, I'll get just to a second. I just need to check in with Molly. Is this the point at which we open the public hearing?
President Kohler, you could open the public hearing anytime now.
All right, so I'm going to open the public hearing, and the way that this is going to proceed is we're going to have board conversation, and then we're going to open it up to the public. So I'm sure we have public comment, and I don't want you to, we're going to get to every comment, but we need to first hear from the board. So we will do that. We will have the public hearing, and then we will bring it back to the board for consideration. Okay, So with that, Monty.
First, a question, Mike. Do you have an estimate of with the various exemptions? Do you have you've made an estimate of a savings of 20 to 60 acre feet per year that works out to roughly about 1/1000th of our annual water demand, which is arguably probably fairly small. But do you have a sense of what the scale is of what the exemptions will allow, and what additional water demand how it will increase under those exemptions? I'm guesstimating that it's similarly small, but I don't want to. I would defer to you if you have a number.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Under the exemptions, the only project that would, the project specifically that would potentially increase demand would be the ADUs. And so though we get a handful of those every year, I'm not able to quantify exactly, what that additional demand would be for those.
And those ADUs
is it fair to say that it would be notably lower than the 20 to 60?
Yes.
Because those would be ADUs that have to be owner occupied. They would not be new, in essence, new residents.
They would have to be owner occupied, yes, but they could be new.
Okay.
But not a new single family dwelling unit, yes.
Yeah.
I could add something to that. Good evening, directors. We've had 32 ADUs that are in the pipeline presently right now since the first of the year, and it's approximately 3 acre feet of water, the demand for that particular group.
But are those the same class of ADUs that we would allow under these exemptions?
Yes, they are, Director Schmidt.
Great. I think the other comment I would have is follow along with Director Gibson on this one, is that I think that figuring out a way to include clarity about a sunset clause is a really important aspect of this, because this isn't, once we have again, the sunset clause is tied to having sufficient precipitation that we are no longer in a condition where we are worried about fundamental water supply for a significant period of time. We'll never be out of a drought. We're never going to be 100% water secure in perpetuity, but this is causing a substantial economic impact, as well as an impact on housing, which I think we again are not in the land use management or housing business. We're in the water supply business. So having clarity about that sunset provision, I think, is a very important part of this discussion. And I'd like to see us address that in a way as we address this ordinance.
Monty, do you feel that, just to be clear, because I think I'm just going to go on a limb here, but I think we absolutely have 100% consensus on that. Do you feel that clarity can only come in the form of an ordinance, or would you be open to providing that clarity in the form of a policy? The way that we have the policy set up for drought restrictions?
I think it could come in as a policy.
Okay. Okay, other board comments on this, Larry? The other Larry?
Thanks a lot. So I think part of the problem, you have, different people have different interests. And I think one of the interests that's being expressed by the supporters of the moratorium is there's a certain amount of uncertainty about future development. And it's not just coming out of thin air. You've got ABAG that's published RHNA requirements, regional housing needs assessment requirements for Marin County, 14,000 units. So, the concern that's being expressed there, I think, has a lot to do with this actual pressure coming from the state to expand housing, which for our district would be a 25% increase in the number of customers, a really large increase, especially when we have diminishing supply. So I think that does need to be put on the table and just, for public consumption, that I think all of the board is aware of that. The other thing I wanted to point out is the projects that are currently being undertaken have broken ground. They're not going to be stopped. Folks that have their entitlements are going to go forward. So I don't think this construction season is going to be interrupted. I think really the impact of this is going to be felt in December, January, when folks are sort of coming out of the winter recess and planning on breaking ground in spring. And my concern with that is, as President Kohler indicated, we are in the water planning business. And as I see the figures here, with the continuing consumption that we're seeing, a relatively small drop, and historic use patterns based on customer use and conservation habitat releases, I foresee us hitting below 20,000 acre feet on December 1st. So it's a pretty grim picture. And I think, when you look at our authority under the water code, it's to protect human consumption, sanitation, and fire. And so those are also very real. Those are very real concerns that we're facing right now. And to me, the numbers don't lie, and the numbers are very concerning. The final thing I wanted to ask is, and I don't know if any staff really knows this, but at what point does a developer get his water rights? In other words, can they get a permit before they get their water hookup? So, I'm just trying to see, as far as the real impact on the construction sector, whether this is going to really slow the planning process if the water hookup part of the process is at the end of what might call the gestation period of these big projects, so that the planning part of it can continue while we see what our water situation is going to be. So that is a long question, but if anybody has an idea, maybe Mike does.
Let me see if I can rephrase the question, Director Bragman. So you're interested in when do they have the ability to connect to the district system?
When do they have to get a water hookup permit from us? At what point in the planning process?
Well, when do they come to the district to get there?
Yes.
So they come basically after they have all their local agency approvals and they have their building permit. So a lot of work has already happened before they come to us.
Okay, and I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but that work can continue even during a moratorium, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then one final point that I wanted to make, and that is a real concern of mine, is that we do have a purple pipe district, which I think is really the model for what the district can do as far as realistically increasing supply would be to expand that district by putting a pipe from Las Colinas out to China Camp and going from there. That is real supply right here in Marin County. But in order to do that, we've got to start enforcing our recycled water ordinances strictly. And any project that is in the pipeline now is going to, I think the board needs to require 100% compliance on the use of recycled water, which includes plumbing. I mean, this has just got to get built into our cost analysis of any future development in that purple pipe zone. It's just, it cannot be an afterthought anymore. So those are my points. And, you know, I'm looking forward to hearing public comment.
Great. Larry Russell, comments?
Yeah, I have one. I think there's a misunderstanding when we're discussing offsets. Larry's on exactly the right track. The people think that we're just allowing someone to buy their way in. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. It has to do with offsetting the cost of expanding the recycled water system to achieve a zero net impact. That's the whole idea of expanding the reclaimed water system. Allows us to reuse the water. There's a guaranteed source of water always available. You know, the Civic Center and the area around it, the Embassy Suites, has been flushing their toilets with reclaimed water for 15 or 20, 25 years for that matter, maybe even longer. And that is really the key to this whole sustainability issue, which is to produce water in a way that is always there and you don't have to go get new fresh water. So the whole issue here is it's not something where the rich people get to get around the numbers. It's where we get the value of the expansion from the new connections with an offset that gives them no impact on the water system. That's the key thing to understand here.
Okay, thank you. Jack, did you have something further?
Nope, I think that's it.
Okay, Monty, anything further? Okay, I'll just make a couple of quick comments before we turn to public comment. Just to emphasize, as a number of people have said, Marin Water is not in the business of development. We are in the water business, and adding new units, even if they would have a relatively small impact overall, is still a burden, an additional burden on a system when we're trying to save 40%, which, as we all saw, is a very significant goal and one we're not close to at this point. I'll say to Ben and the staff, I think you've put forward a considered approach because it's not a one size fits all. There's a number of very detailed and I think very well considered exemptions for projects close to fruition. I think we should have a further conversation about affordable housing, which obviously is a huge challenge for Marin County. And I also think the variance procedure is well thought out. As Director Bragman has said, there's nothing in this ordinance that would stop planning at the city or county level. That can keep proceeding. It can be a long time before we even get to the water district. So it's not as though everything stops in its tracks if we take this action. If there are impacts, I think the question is, in light of uncertainties about precipitation and in light of the very real possibility of ongoing drought, it's not clear to me that it would be responsible to proceed with business as usual and to increase system demand, even at small levels, when we are asking our current businesses, our current institutions, our current local governments, and our current residents to make fairly drastic cuts, as we've heard already today. So even a relatively small 1% additional burden on the system is significant. And I think we need to, so it's right. I mean, it's just a significant addition at a time when we're asking everybody to make very, very real cuts. So that leads me to think that, since we're talking about a relatively short-term, hopefully, approach, that it makes sense to be going in that direction. Our overwhelming responsibility is to not run out of water, is to ensure that we can provide basic, safety, clean, health, reliable supplies to the community as it is today, to ensure basic human needs. That has to be our guiding principle. So with that, as maybe a way to bring to a close our board comments, I'd like to open it to public comments. I understand that we have 14 so far, Terry.
It's gone up now to 617 and it might keep going. but 18. So it's
Great. In light of the fact that it's already just about 10 o'clock, and I know we've heard from a number of members of the public already, I'm going to ask people to do their best to not repeat what other people have already said or about to say. And let's go with 2 minutes per person.
2 minutes. Okay. Okay. I have in this order, Raleigh Katz and Linda Jackson, please.
Good evening. I'm Raleigh Katz. I'm the Executive Director of the Marin Association of Public Employees. We're the union that represents the majority of county Marin employees. We would support an exclusion to your proposal to cover affordable housing. I think the description you have is pretty strict, about 100%. Water shortage is a reality, but so is the housing shortage. Marin County is not the only place in California that faces water challenges. So do other counties. We have, as somebody mentioned earlier, more and more people who work in this county cannot afford to live in this county, including, I'm sure, many of your employees. And I understand that the process takes a while, but I'm not a developer, but I want to spend the time and money to go through all the processes of seeking local approval and then find out that I can't get a water hookup. So we urge you strongly to support an exclusion to cover affordable housing. Thank you very much for your time and for all your efforts for the community. Thank you.
Thanks for the comment.
Thank you.
Good evening, President Kohler and members of the board. This is Linda Jackson. I'm with the Aging Action Initiative. We're a professional collaborative of people working for the well-being of older people in Marin County. I'll just note that in this county, we are totally dependent on each other. And you pull one thread and you weaken the whole fabric of Marin. I'd submit that maybe Marin has not recovered from the 9 years of moratorium in the last 50 years on new housing because of water hookup moratoriums. That's 20% of the last 50 years when new housing could not be built. Housing is like water. It's needed for good health. We need it for our local workers, for our caregivers, for our family members. I would like to suggest that the $1 million that might be lost out of those new hookups, you have are you looking at rate increases for homeowners? That aspect of the equation is not being discussed this evening. There are other options. I lived in Berkeley when they had a per capita rationing on water in 1989, 1990, and we were able to, in the East Bay, meet the requirements of the water supply. This should be a last resort. There are other opportunities, other programs, other approaches that need to be considered, as water districts across the state are doing. So the percentage that's saved, the water that's saved with this program, frankly, is just a drop in the bucket. And I really encourage you to look at other alternatives first before you go to this, adopt this motion. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have next Ruth Kiskadin and Alexis Gevorgian.
Hi, this is, can you hear me? This is
this
actually Ruth's husband, John Wright. Can you hear me? Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of points. First of all, I think the district has a solution here that would actually mitigate some of the very profound economic impacts of a total moratorium, and that would be to allow connections as long as the applicants agree to not have landscaping. I would note that this is what the North Marin Water District has adopted, and your own 2040 water resource plan that you adopted in 2017 calls for that as an option. I think I think the idea that you're going to be, the exemptions that you've provided for in your ordinance are too limited. You're going to shut down a tremendous number of projects. The second point I would make is that I think it's unrealistic to think that any planning or permitting is going to go on if there's a moratorium on most projects. To Mr. Bragman's point, I just think people will just stop. And to Ms. Jackson's point earlier, I think the effect of that is you're going to have just a housing drought for many years if you take an approach that is quite this draconian. So I would urge you to follow the lead of what Nevada's doing and what your own plan called for a few years ago, and allow connections provided that users agree not to have landscape irrigation, which is by far the largest burden on the system. I think if you do that, that will have a very significant effect, a positive effect, and really mitigate some of the very profound real world impacts of this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alexis?
Thank you. Thank you, members of the board and staff. You guys have done a great job on the entire presentation, very comprehensive and thorough. We are affordable housing developers in which we have a fully entitled project in Marin County. And we've been working on this project for many years, and we have millions of dollars invested in the project. And what I'd like to ask the board and staff to consider is that there is also a distinction between projects that are proceeding to entitle affordable housing as opposed to projects that are entitled. And the projects that are entitled will experience a large irreparable harm. For example, in our case, we have taken down almost $3 million of debt, and we don't have a will serve letter, but we are now in the process of doing the working drawings, which amount to another $500,000 to $700,000. So there should be a distinction between projects that are entitled for affordable housing as opposed to projects that are going to be entitled. And we would appreciate the board making that distinction. And just a general comment, the amount of new permits being issued really is a de minimis amount relative to the entire impact. And certainly we would appreciate affordable housing to be exempted from that. Again, thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Lynn Lubermersky and Paul Kafetz right after.
Okay.
Go ahead, Ms. Lubermersky.
Thank you. Yesterday, I was at Northgate Mall and the experience was really eerie. It's almost completely empty, like a lot of retail space in Marin. It's a zombie mall. But there's an approved plan for development there, one that will provide lots of badly needed housing for Marin and to revitalize that community. There will be no lawns. There will be relatively low water usage. By passing this ordinance, you will be ending the possibility for greener solutions for Marin housing. Instead of a draconian ordinance like this, instead be creative. Provide incentives for the construction of multi-unit housing that uses gray water to flush toilets and that recycles water for use in the home. You can take this drought emergency as an opportunity to provide incentives for the right kind of construction, for water-wise building, and you should do this rather than banning water hookups. We need new housing, new water-wise housing, and I oppose your ordinance. Marin needs housing.
Thank you for the comment.
Paul Kafetz.
Yes, one question through the chair of the staff report. Of the water saving estimate, did this take into account the 1,350 units at Northgate, the portion of that which would not be purple plumbing? Did it take into account the non-purple area at Seminary Strawberry, where there are 350 to 550 2 to 3 bedroom townhouses, 250 senior apartments, and 1,000 student university with 200 employees? How can that be 20 to 60 acre feet? Were those projects which are in the application process included in the water consumption estimate that staff reported to you?
Mike, do you have an answer for that?
So the estimate was based on past, a recent experience with new connections. So the projects referenced by the commenter are not in the application process with the district. They're still going through the local agency planning process. So it could be years before either of those projects ever come our way. So we looked back, what was the average for the past few years on new connections? And that's how we came up with the estimate.
Then my comment is simply the massive project at Strawberry Seminary has already completed its EIR hearing at the county and is going ahead very rapidly. It is likely to be approved within 1 year. So this is well within the scope of this moratorium. And that is hundreds and hundreds of acre feet of water, not 20 to 60. So the de minimis estimate that you were given is misleading as to possible water savings by a water hookup moratorium.
Can we get some clarity? I'd like to ask a question about that, which is I don't know if who could speak best to this, but that when we talk about very large projects like these, which are very different than much smaller developments, that is there a review process before something of that scale is permitted with respect to proving that there's existing water supply to meet the needs for such a large development? I just want to try to understand if we're mixing together very large developments versus smaller types that also people are talking about.
Do you want to answer that, Paul? That they would be treated differently.
Yes, thank you, directors. Any projects that have more than 500 residential units or 500,000 square feet of retail, commercial, or 250,000 square feet of office commercial space, or 500 or more hotel rooms is required by state law, Senate Bill 610 that was passed in 2001, that a water supply assessment is required for these large development projects. And both the projects that were discussed would require that to be done.
At what point in the process?
In order for them to get through the entitlement process, this would have to be done at the local level, whether it be the county for the Strawberry project or City of San Rafael if Northgate's within.
But is that done prior to approval of the project, or is it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask a question? And if it's too granular, just let me know. But there's a new hotel being put in central San Rafael. And it looks like it may be 50, 75 rooms, something like that. Did that come to us for a hookup this year? Or, I mean, it's still being constructed. It's around 5th and C Street.
Yes, Director Bragman, that's the AC Hotel. It's 141 units. It's been under construction for well over a year. They got their building permit, quite a while ago. That it's gone through entitlements, years ago. These projects take a long time. They received a water availability letter several years ago, and they're due to get their they have a water meter existing. They're due to get a larger water meter out there soon.
And how much will that take out of the system? What is their consumption anticipated to be?
Their consumption's expected to be 12.5 acre feet.
And how many other similarly situated construction projects are there like that in our district?
We had discussed the 3 other larger projects in Mike's presentation. And those are close. I mean, the Whistle Stop project, which has no building permit yet, that's affordable housing at 67 units. It's approximately 9 acre feet. That's kind of the closest one and like that. That's kind of in the pipeline right now.
Mhm. And are there others? I mean, could we, if pressed, you know, do we have data on the other increases to our water supply? Or I should say increased consumption or increased pull on the water supply?
I'm sorry, Director Bragman. I had some noise in the background there. I didn't hear your last part of that.
So Paul, I think what he's asking, and we could certainly pull that together, Director Bragman. I believe what you're looking at is what projects have been fully approved and are in the construction phase, but haven't yet turned on the tap, so to speak. What's that outstanding demand look like? If that's what you're asking, Director Bragman,
Yeah,
we
essentially.
could pull that together for you.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess my point is that what we're talking about, there's a little bit of uncertainty about some of the data here. So I think we should all kind of keep that in mind.
Okay, we have 16 public comments now. We're going to continue with Frank Egger, then Ann Gray. Mr. Egger?
Frank Egger from Fairfax. Legislation that has just passed the state Senate overrides commercial zoning in California's 482 cities and 58 counties. It will automatically allow high-density housing in all commercial zones. Lake Mendocino is on the east fork of the Russian River, and it's running on empty. I was in Guerneville this past Friday. The Russian River at Guerneville has huge sandbars out to the middle of the river. The Russian will be running underground in some sections by September. The state is demanding 17,000 new housing units over 8 years in Sonoma County. Sonoma supplies 25% of our water. How much longer will we get that 25%? Here in Marin, the state wants 14,000 new units in 8 years. Much of both counties is included in wildland urban interface zones with few options for evacuations out of dead-end canyons on narrow roads, many one-lane roads in the hill areas. We've had major wildland fires for the past 5 years in the North Bay. Fires have not slowed the state's demand for housing in WUI fire zones. Mill Valley had a scare yesterday as the county pulled out all stops with engines coming from all over Marin. Our firefighters got on it quickly and stopped that fire in Mill Valley. It could have burned many homes if it got away from them. By the end of September, our lakes will be down to 30% capacity at the date. 30% capacity at the date we are going, at the rate we are going. If we have one more extremely dry year, we will come close to running out of water. Existing customers have rights to potable water. The only way the state will understand how bad it is here in Marin is to enact a strict moratorium on all new hookups. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gray?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ann Gray, and I'm the CEO of Vivalon, formerly Whistle Stop. And we've been engaged in planning affordable senior housing in our Healthy Aging Campus for Marin County residents for nearly 10 years now. And today we're mere months away from securing our permits and then breaking ground on construction for this project. It's been so highly anticipated by the community. And on behalf of Vivalon and our members and the over 400 older adults on the current waiting list for these 67 Section 8 affordable senior housing units, which will be built by Eden Housing, that are available when the project is completed, I urge the Marin Municipal Water District to allow affordable housing projects to move forward. And please ensure that any new policies or moratoriums or fees exempt affordable housing and community service uses. This would allow Vivalon's Healthy Aging Campus project to move forward to provide critically needed affordable homes and community services. The timeline for our project is approximately 18 months from the time construction commences. Past moratoriums in Marin County have lasted as long as 4+ years, and this is time our community cannot wait. One resident I met with recently said his mother's caregiver is on our waiting list, and another stated the importance of the safety and sense of community a project like this would provide for Marin County's elder orphans who have no family or anyone to advocate for them. Our new Healthy Aging Campus will encompass the first 2 floors of this 6-story project. It is planned as a car-free community, and we have the largest percentage of population over the age of 65 in the entire state, and it's one of the oldest counties in the country. At the heart of living well into old age are the power of social connection, intellectual pursuits, access to medical care, physical activity, and good nutrition. All of these elements are part of Vivalon's mission and our vision for the Healthy Aging Campus. The time to make an impact in the lives of older adults is now. Thank you so much for your consideration of this very important request that will allow Marin County to remain a vital and thriving community for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comment. We really appreciate it.
The next speaker is Andy Blovitt, and the last 4 digits of someone's phone number, 1402. Andy? Andy? Let's try this again. Okay, I'll get back. There you are. Go ahead and speak.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So my name is Andy Blavelt. I'm a longtime district resident. I currently live in Larkspur. I was in the housing and land use businesses both, as a nonprofit project manager for almost 20 years and a municipal city planner before that. Water is a vital part of our community infrastructure and can't really be considered in isolation. So I urge you to adopt an exemption for deed restricted affordable housing, in which at least 80% of the units, I would say, are restricted by a public agency to affordable rents for low and moderate income folks. I appreciate the severity of the current drought, but as others mentioned, there's also a severe drought lasting a lot longer than 2 years and the adequate supply of housing affordable to all the members of our community. It keeps getting worse. Construction of apartments of all kinds was down 25% just in the last year. So cities and citizens have worked hard to overcome this through measures like promoting accessory dwelling units. But while ADUs and publicly supported facilities for public agencies are exempted from the moratorium, deed restricted affordable housing is not exempt, even though projects like Whistle Stops compose the single most important publicly supported resource to combat this ongoing crisis. The key issue, I can tell you from my experience, is the mismatch of timelines. The drought has emerged over a couple of years, and the moratorium might last a few years more. Affordable housing in Marin County takes a lot longer to come to fruition. I worked on the transformation of Marin City on a pair of projects for formerly homeless at Hamilton and Novato, townhomes for people with special needs along large families in Larkspur Landing, and family apartments in Corte Madera, and all restricted to low and very low income residents. These projects all took closer to 10 years than 2 to plan, develop, and build. The permit comes relatively near the end of many years of advocacy, community engagement, and fundraising, along with serious financial commitments, as a previous person mentioned. So these developments all had up to half a dozen separate sources of financing, the ones I worked on, mostly public and charitable, all with different program rules and timelines that had to be carefully assembled and coordinated across a multi-year horizon.
Okay, that was, do you have one more sentence, sir? And then.
Yes.
Okay.
The easy solution is to include the affordable housing exemption. I would only recommend that you make it 80 or 90% of the units, because sometimes there are existing residents when a property is rehabbed that have the right to stay in. And so sometimes 100% is not quite attainable.
Thank you. Okay, the last 4 digits of 1402, and then after that would be Tamar Saunders.
James Holmes, Larkspur. I support the proposed ordinance, and I think the proposed exemptions are generous, if any, and should not be expanded. Simply put, you don't have enough water to go around now, and therefore you should add as few new customers as practicable. A moratorium is consistent with what you did the last time, and there's no substantial reason for a different approach now. A moratorium is consistent with what North Marin has done, and there's no substantial reason for a different approach. Finally, a moratorium is essential for credibility. You cannot credibly tell customers to endure dirty toilets and dead plants while new connections continue as if all is normal. Opponents of a moratorium say we should double down on conservation, but that just proves that what they seek is reallocation rather than conservation. Opponents cite the economic impact, and rightly so, but the last moratorium did not devastate the local economy despite individual hardship in some cases. Renovations will still continue the bread and butter of small contractors. Opponents cite the impact on jobs, but we also read of tremendous projects and tremendous demands by demand elsewhere. The jobs will go where the water is more available. Moratorium opponents say that new connections are a small addition to overall demand, but your conservation program is premised on many small efforts to reduce demand. You cannot say that any saving from cutbacks by customers is necessary, but savings from cutting back new customers is not necessary. Again, the moratorium is not an anti-development ploy. It's a reluctant but realistic response to a climate emergency. We've increased supply in the past and should continue to do so in the future, but we cannot do it fast enough to keep adding new connections now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Tamara Saunders, then Ali Shabahangi, and then Robin Miller in that order, please.
Hello.
Saunders?
Okay, you can hear me, Terry?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Tamara Saunders. I'm a project developer from Eden Housing, working with our partner Vivalon, formerly known as Whistle Stop, to develop a healthy aging campus. It's a pretty unique, already entitled mixed-use project in downtown San Rafael, where 100% of the units are affordable senior housing. There are also 2 commercial floors that will be operated by Vivalon, providing senior and healthcare services to residents and also the surrounding community. Just to give a little bit of background, this project has been in development for almost a decade, and we've been extremely humbled to see the community, county, city, even Governor Newsom rally support of this project because of the variety of needs it will be meeting for the area. The impact of a water moratorium on new service hookups and any new water conservation fees could honestly derail our project schedule and financing, as well as increase costs. If the board is not aware, the majority of our financing is conditional on us beginning and completing construction within a given period of time. So echoing what Ann said, we are requesting that any new policies on moratoriums or fees exempt not only affordable housing, but also community serving uses. This would allow our Healthy Aging Campus project, which includes our affordable housing component and also our senior community servicing component, to continue to move forward. So thank you so much for your time and for your consideration on this item.
Thank you for the comment.
Ali Shabahangi.
Yes. Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, I'm Ali Shabahangi. I'm working on 6 units, housing units in San Anselmo. Our project is entitled. It took me 3 years to get entitlements. I spent a lot of money on it, but the way this ordinance is drafted, it would basically stop this project from proceeding. I was expecting to break ground next month. And I'm frantically trying to get the application in. I had a conversation with Nicole, staff engineer with your department earlier today, but there's going to be quite a bit of back and forth to get the application complete with the amount of information that she needs. So I'm hoping I consider my project a pipeline project, but I think the exemptions are a bit too narrow. I won't be able to proceed with my plans, unfortunately, unless you consider broadening the exemptions, maybe giving more than 30 days to complete the application. May I suggest till August 30th to get the applications in completed? That could help. And any other ways you could help smaller projects like mine to continue. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin Miller, please.
Thank you.
board members, and I particularly want to thank Larry Bragman for discussing RENA, as well as Jack about not being land planners, and as well as Monty for his concerns about the planning process. And one thing I want to clarify about the ordinance specifically is the necessity for the building permit. That is the absolute last portion, the last thing that any builder, single family home or large builder, gets before proceeding forward. Millions of dollars in a single family home, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent to get to that point. So to require the necessity for the building permit itself, I think is quite onerous, especially considering the fact that discretionary permits are achieved at a tentative map. After that, there's another year of processing that goes along with the final map for a large subdivision or a larger project. And then beyond that, you have to get a building permit and site improvement permits and all the like. So to cut it off and require the building permit, I think is really not fulfilling the spirit of what I think the ordinance is all about. That being said, I just wanted to clarify that one element because I think it's critical to your ordinance. The other things that I'd like to say, I have a project. It's in San Rafael. It's 37 homes, and it's got a pipeline agreement. I don't have building permits. I'm going through that process, and the reason why is because the code had to be updated. The building code had to be updated. So I'm going through another 6 to 9 month process, and I'm getting about halfway through that process to get to that point. But again, millions of dollars have been spent to get to that point. And now finally, even with the agreement, it's uncertain in reading the ordinance that I can actually build homes even without landscaping. I will add, I did work on 33 North as well as the AC Marriott in San Rafael and 2nd and B Street, all new projects. I worked on entitlements of those projects and the construction of 33 North, which is the first Northern California building to ever have recycled water.
All right, thank you, Mr. Miller.
And I think that that is an avenue that should be expanded and expanded more broadly to a lot more housing.
Thank you. Next, we have Baron Hamill, then we have Barbara Salzman, and then Brendan Hickey in that order. Go ahead, Ms. Hamill.
Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure I sound like a broken record, as you've heard me say it before, but I'll say it again to emphasize how important I think it is in terms of a small saving of water by individuals on a daily basis that can make a huge difference over the long run. A simple thing to include in your water hookup is to mandate recirculating hot water or hot water on demand systems be part of the construction plans for all new building permits and all kitchen and bath remodel projects. It would be easy to put this in place immediately, as it doesn't significantly change building plans and can be installed in already ongoing projects. It should be mandated for all commercial and residential projects and makes no significant increase in construction costs. If now isn't the time to introduce this concept, I don't know when would be a better time. Thank you in advance for your consideration of this suggestion.
Thank you.
Hi.
Barbara?
Yeah, I'm Barbara Salzman. I'm president of Marin Audubon Society. We just met this evening, our board, before you met, and voted to unanimously to endorse and urge you to adopt this ordinance. We consider it a minimum. We consider that there are a number of other steps that you should also be considering and add to the ordinance. One is no filling of swimming pools. I'm sure you've heard that before. Banning on watering lawns, and also that you should consider mandatory per person water allowance, as was done in 1976 and 77. Your responsibilities are to current customers as well as to conserving the habitat releases for the ecosystem that are in your care. I'd like to bring up one point on one of your exemptions, and that is the exemption for public agency projects. I don't understand that. I mean, it's not clear that they would even necessarily be in the public interest, you know, the broader public a benefit. They could be a garage or whatever. It's not like it would be restricted to something like a hospital or something. So I think you should look at that more closely and restrict it to public agency projects that have a real public health or safety benefit. Thank you, and please do at least at minimum vote for this ordinance. Thanks.
Thanks, Barbara. We really appreciate the comment. And then Ben, do you or somebody else on the staff want to, I think Barbara raises an interesting question about the exemption for public health, for public agency projects. Can you talk a little bit more about the rationale for that?
I think part of it is what she alluded to, you know, if you think about a new fire station or that sort of stuff. I don't know, Mike or Paul, are there other examples, community buildings, I guess, community service buildings, that sort of stuff that would fall into this?
Yes, Ben, it could be community buildings. It could be public buildings like city halls, those sorts of structures.
Yeah. Isn't Ross building, Ross has decided to either rebuild the fire station or town hall. So.
Are we limiting landscaping for those buildings as part of the exemption?
Yes.
I just wanted to confirm that. Okay. All right. Who's next, Terry?
We have Brendan Hickey. Then after Brendan, we have Jenny Silva and Robert Upton. Go ahead, Mr. Hickey.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for your patience. I'm sure you all must be tired at this point. 3.5 years ago, I purchased a vacant lot in San Rafael and have been working to build a single family house for my family of 4 since then. After several years of work and several $100,000 in costs, I received planning entitlements for the house from the city of San Rafael in 2020. On February 16th, 2021, I received a letter from MMWD saying, "Dear Mr. Hickey, your request to provide water service to the above referenced parcel has been approved by the district." It's signed by Mr. Ban. I assume this is what's generally referred to as a water availability letter. I think Mr. Bragman asked a question earlier about at what point people come to the water district, and I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, it's not after receiving a building permit, it's after getting planning entitlements. Based on this commitment to serve the property with water, I then rented the home next door to the vacant lot, moved my family, enrolled my children in new schools, put my house for sale, and made numerous financial and other commitments to develop the property, which I was expecting to build later this year. This is very much a project with entitlements that's in the pipeline that has a service agreement, but the way the ordinance is written, because I'm still waiting for San Rafael to approve my building permit, I may have my project canceled, and it may be canceled for long enough that all of my entitlements and permits would expire. And I would really ask the board to please amend the ordinance so that developments that have received firm written commitments from MMWD for water are exempted from the ban. The last point I would make very briefly is that the cost per acre foot based on your estimates of the savings is $37,500. That's based on the staff's estimate of savings and of revenue lost. If that sounds high, it's because it is. The average cost, the average benefits.
Thank you.
If that money were to be reinvested in increasing supply, it would increase supply by 10 times the amount of the projected savings.
Thank you, Mr. Hickey.
Can I ask staff about this? I had not thought that folks in the situation that's just been described would be precluded. Can staff respond to that? I thought that somebody who had the level of permissions that have just been described would actually be exempt. So it would be great for staff to clarify that situation.
Mike, did you want to give it a shot?
Well, I'm not familiar with Mr. Hickey's particular circumstance, but if If he has a completed water service application by June 30th, he would be exempt.
But that would require, for clarity, right, a building permit.
Yes.
The letter he referenced, just to be clear, is, Molly, how would we characterize that letter in this context?
We refer to it as a water availability letter, and these are issued oftentimes very early in the process, even before the entitlement process begins, because oftentimes the municipalities want to know that a property is within proximity to water service so that it can be served. Otherwise, they would need to go through the pipeline extension agreement application process. So it is possible that somebody could have entitlements for a project and not yet be in a building permit issuance position. And they may be in the pipeline. So that's what we were trying to account for to some extent with the grace period. And it's imperfect.
There's always going to be something.
There's
but,
always going to be someone who either just
right.
makes it or just doesn't. It's, yes.
There's also, the variance procedure, and some of these properties would probably fall under that. I can't speak, to the individuals, of course.
Sure.
It'd be a
And that's not,
case-by-case basis.
that's not what we're doing here tonight. I think a question for the staff is how many people in that situation. I mean, I don't want to get into the particulars of this person's situation, but I mean, when people have made very significant financial, the kinds of sacrifices we're hearing about, very significant financial reliances, let's just put it that way. When there's been a lot of reliance, I think it would be important for the staff and the board to have a better understanding of how many people are in this kind of gray area where they've gotten this first letter, but not the ultimate letter. I'm guessing that's not information that Mike or Molly has immediately at hand.
No.
Okay.
I do, excuse me, President Kohler. Right now, we've got 14 residential pending applications that are coming through that we're waiting on building permits. The building permit process is 1.5 to 2 months, depending on how, for smaller, simpler projects. The more complex ones obviously take longer, depends on the plans and that kind of stuff. We've got a couple commercial and actually 3 irrigation ones that are in the pipeline right now. Just under approximately 4 acre-feet of demand for all those projects.
Okay.
Maybe we should consider relaxing the deadline by another 30 days.
Yeah, or at least, we don't want to make people crazy, but I mean, if people, like I say, have made very significant financial decisions, in reliance on a letter from us, I think that's something that has to be considered either in the exemptions or in the variance process.
I just wonder if we have a clear picture about the process at where we want to cut this off, where people have made substantial economic investments, and that doing this will cause a significant economic impact. So I'm just wondering if we have really picked the right moment in the process, the permitting process, to cut things off, and a deadline doesn't necessarily solve that.
Exactly.
So if I could kind of capture my understanding to share, the water availability letter is very early in the process, almost pro forma, like what Mike was saying. Is essentially looking at the hydraulics of the system. Is there water available in the area of the single family home or the development? Or do you need a pipeline extension? So those happen very early on. I would suggest, if the board wants to take into consideration projects that have invested significantly, moving, as Director Bragman noted, the date would be one way to capture more of those projects that are, close but may not meet the June 30th. So that's, And by doing that, it's not really opening a big door because projects can only move so fast. A project that's in the very early stage will not be getting a building permit by, say, July 30th, but you would be addressing these folks that are so close, but just waiting on the building permit that may take, a number of weeks.
Isn't that why we have the variance process built into it?
Yeah.
That absolutely is part of it.
And if we haven't, and I'm sorry, it's just been a long night, so I may not be remembering all the details, Ben, but maybe we should, include in the variance process, especially if we're talking about individual families that have, made the kinds of, financial commitments that have been described. And again, I don't want to get into this particular situation, but does it make sense to include that kind of thing, that level of reliance? That people have sold their home or moved their kid or, done, where it's not just, oh, we're just waiting, but we haven't really changed our circumstances. I guess what I'm getting at is where there's been a very significant change in circumstances in reliance on our letter.
President
That's
Kohler, I
something
do,
you want to consider in the
if I
variance.
may, I do think that we do have one of the variance considerations or options that we have available to look at is undue hardship. And so those are sets of circumstances, I believe, that may be along the lines of what you're describing. They're not solely financial, but they're a combination of issues and circumstances that have come to pass where it may be unique and specific to a particular family.
Okay, great. Again, I don't want to belabor this too much or get into this circumstance, and since we're approaching 11 o'clock, and I think we still have, Terry, what, 9 comments?
We have 7. So I don't mean to belabor this, but should Mr. Hickey then contact staff for engineering to go over his particular case?
I think
the reason I'm asking is because he keeps raising his hand, so that's why.
Okay, I think we're moving on beyond Mr. Hickey. We appreciate your comment. I think your particular situation we're going to have to deal with offline. That's not what we're doing here tonight, but we do appreciate your comments, and I think you've seen that we have taken them seriously, and you're certainly welcome to contact staff.
Okay, perfect. The next 2 speakers, Ms. Jenny Silva, then Robert Upton.
Hi, thanks for taking my comment tonight. I just wanted to talk about the impact that this moratorium is going to have on the various Marin jurisdictions for getting their housing elements certified. Basically, the passage of this moratorium is going to prohibit almost every jurisdiction from getting their housing element certified. That blockage is going to cost the citizens of Marin hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in fees from the state. We're going to lose opportunities for funding for the state for affordable housing. And we're doing this for something that is not even going to impact our ability to address the drought. I'm just amazed that this is being taken as the first step when it's 1/1000th of what we need when we're looking for a 40% reduction. And so I just can't state strongly enough how misguided I think this approach is to dealing with the drought. I've heard a lot tonight of folks saying that you're not in the business of land use. I cannot interpret this moratorium as anything different than a land use regulation. I don't see how you can categorize it in any different direction. Your job as the water board is to provide water for the residents. It is not to overrule every Marin jurisdiction on land use, and that is what you are doing. And I think it's misguided. I think it's wrong. I think it's going to be extraordinarily costly for Marin residents, and it's going to exacerbate our huge housing shortage. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the comment. I have to make one correction. This is not the first thing we're doing. It's the 20th or 30th thing we're doing. We're doing our best to deal with this for months. And we have many, many water conservation programs in place. And I would say it's one of the last things we're doing. We will, of course, continue with our programs, but I have to disagree with your characterization that this is the first thing we're doing. It is absolutely not. This is something the Water District hasn't done for 50 years. We are in an extraordinary situation. And unfortunately, we can't simply manufacture water in the time of a drought like this. I think you're hearing that we're taking these concerns seriously. I expect there will be changes in the proposal, but anyway, I just have to share that as a response to your concern, but I appreciate the comment.
Mr. Robert Upton, then after Mr. Upton, we have Garth Wells and the last 4 digits 9461. Go ahead, Mr. Upton.
Thank you. Thank you, President Kohler, members of the board. Robert Upton, Campus Properties. I'm one of the developers of 350 Merridale in San Rafael. That's right across from the Civic Center. And we appreciate the board's efforts to balance the two crises here that we're dealing with, the crisis of the drought and the housing crisis. My partner wrote to you on May 25th outlining our particular situation, and I'll be brief just to quickly summarize where we are. We've worked for 5 years to secure all discretionary approvals for 45 homes, including affordable units on this property. Since that, we've obtained approval from Fish and Wildlife and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And we did receive a water availability letter from your staff as part of this process. We've now applied for a pipeline extension agreement. We'll be applying this next week for a grading permit from the City of San Rafael for the installation of a stormwater outfall. And my reading of your exception is that we will qualify under your draft ordinance for that exception and that we wouldn't need a building permit. However, I would echo Robin Miller's comments about the building permit. I think that's completely the wrong place to draw this difficult line. It is the last thing that we have to do, and we're still a little way off from doing that. So these will be 45 of the most water efficient units in the district. We're very fortunate that we're able to use your recycled water for irrigation, which, as we've heard all evening, is a very significant part of water demand. Our landscaping also will not have any lawn. So I think, we're trying to do our best to work with the situation, and we appreciate your efforts to work with us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Garth Wells.
I'm a landowner in Mill Valley, and I have entitlements and I have my plans in building, but the length of time for getting permits is definitely more than weeks. It's probably best case 4 months. And so I'm wondering, who do I talk to about getting an extension or exemption so that I can apply for my water permit in 4 months, or apply for it now without a permit?
Ben, can you provide him that information, or should we get in touch?
Yeah, I think Mike's
have
about
somebody
to.
get in touch offline?
Yeah.
Right.
Mike,
Yeah, Mr. Wells can reach out to me.
So I can, Mike Ban, how do I reach you?
You can send an email to the board secretary and she'll get you my information.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker, last 4 digits 9461.
Yes, good evening, directors. My name is Joanne Webster. I'm president and CEO of the San Rafael Chamber. We're the largest chamber in Marin with over 600 Marin employers representing 26,000 employees. I'm also speaking tonight as a steering committee member of the Housing Crisis Action and Keep Marin Working. We'd like to express our deep opposition regarding your proposal for a moratorium on new water service connections during the drought. Given the low amount of water that could be saved from a moratorium on water hookups, especially given how new construction is designed to use only minimal amounts of water, we encourage you instead to look at other better options to increase capacity and resiliency in our water supply. 50% of our water consumption is watering lawns, and yet only 0.01% of the total usage now is what is being projected in savings on banning new water hookups. The moratorium has potential for serious and costly implications to Marin's economy and our communities as we recover from COVID. Our local businesses have been hit really hard, and putting a moratorium on top of burdened economy will impair and delay the ability for us to recover and get people back to work. The moratorium will also intensify racial inequities that exist in Marin by stopping housing developments. The Chamber has made production of new housing units a top priority focus and supports new housing production financially attainable by our local workforce. Developers will simply not look at building in Marin and they'll go elsewhere. We further believe that the cost to the attempt to conserve will be an unfair burden on some in response to a community challenge that should be shared equally. We believe the community stands united Marin business community stands united in our desire to join with you and survive this drought and conserve water. We understand it's a crisis. However, we feel a significant amount of more thought and data analysis needs to be put into this policy prior to implementation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next, Mr. Roger Roberts. Go ahead, sir. Go ahead.
I support this ordinance as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Okay. The next, Rick Williams, then Stephen Sachs. Go ahead, Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much. My name is Rick Williams. I'm a resident of San Rafael. I'm also the architect on the Vivillon development, and I live in the downtown. I think, but I'm also an urban planner who believes that the board should consider that higher density options in places that are planning the way ABAG, MTC, et cetera, are asking us to do. High density developments, mixed use developments in the downtown of our communities, such as San Rafael and in other communities, is what we have been asked to do as a community. And those are the most efficient use of water in those buildings, which will be the next generation of buildings in Marin. Where all the water use is taking place is in the past historic developments of Marin, which have large lawns, lots of landscaping, nice communities, but they are the ones that are using a disproportionate amount of water for the residents that live there today. I'm a resident of San Rafael. I understand the drought. I lived through the last 2 moratoriums in Marin, and I think that you should really look broader and ask not just the future developments, but the current developments, the current communities to do more in saving water. That's what we're trying to do at our home. And that's what the Marin residents should be doing. And if they can only save 10% after your efforts, they aren't listening to you because there isn't enough fallback for them, impact to them for not doing so. So they're ignoring you because you aren't putting enough pressure on them to make the real water savings that they can do that is going to get us through this drought the way we should be. So we should be looking at it as a community and not for future individual developments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Stephen Sachs.
The Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative advocates for projects and policies that advance affordable housing, as well as environmental integrity and social justice. We recognize the district's recognition of the need to encourage affordable housing, as demonstrated in part by its policy of discounting water meter connection fees for affordable housing and ADUs. In the same vein, if you conclude that a moratorium is necessary, we ask that you adopt the proposed exemptions for ADUs and 100% affordable housing developments from any moratorium on hookups. While the drought is a serious challenge, structural racism, income inequality, and the resulting lack of affordable, stable housing are also serious public crises. In fact, Climate change disproportionately impacts low-income households, and we cannot afford to exacerbate that impact by enacting policies that further disadvantage them. Multifamily residents, such as affordable housing developments, tend to use much less water per unit than single-family homes, largely due to shared outdoor spaces, which result in many fewer gallons devoted to landscaping. Please continue to explore ways that you can encourage more responsible water use and development practices without sacrificing social equity to the drought. Again, please exempt affordable housing and ADUs from a moratorium and from any potential conservation fees. In this regard, we specifically note the importance of such an exemption to the Vivon project for seniors in need of affordable housing in Marin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see, then we have meeting 3, form 4, please. And then Bruce Dorfman.
Yes, hi, this is Paul Farrow. I'm an architect here in Marin and a resident of Marin for more than 20 years. And I just found out about this whole ordinance being proposed this evening. So I was a bit surprised by, having been a Marin resident and getting my water bill and maybe not noticing enough. But so I'm kind of wondering how you're getting the word out about the problem. So I have a couple questions. Have you notified all the planning and building departments that such an ordinance was coming so that they could notify owners and developers of what was coming down the road and for them to prepare? Have you coordinated with planning departments so that they can designate vacant lots as prohibited from development, so that when future owners and developers come in, they're aware of this? And then have you done an impact report that summarizes the economic and social impacts from the loss of housing and commercial development in Marin? And then I would sort of implore you to challenge developers and the design community to develop solutions that conserve and reuse water, as opposed to just shutting down projects and ending the livelihood and economic gains for people. So I just ask you to look to the design community to come up with solutions that could help, and put ordinances in place that are more about solutions and not just shutting things down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comment. Again, I don't want to get too far down the weeds, but do we have a quick answer about our coordination with planning departments? And I believe we did a legal determination that this was exempt from an EIR, but do we have some quick answers to those questions?
Yeah, I'll let Molly answer the second. There's been quite extensive communication and coordination with the planning departments and the cities and towns on this issue.
Thank you.
Molly?
Yes, and President Kohler, you're correct. We've made a determination that this is the project is exempt under the emergency exemptions under CEQA, given the water shortage emergency. And that is noted in the ordinance.
I thought I saw that. Okay, great. Terry?
Okay, Bruce Dorfman, please.
Thank you. I'd like to first thank the directors. I appreciate the seriousness of the situation that we're in. It's hard to look at some of the exhibits that were previously shared and not understand where we have dire straits. But I'd like to make 4 comments regarding this ordinance. Number 1, I think there absolutely should be a sunset provision in it, if for no other reason than it shows good governance by this board in addressing it at a fixed point in time. If at that point in time we need to extend the moratorium, then that makes sense. But I think that it should be part of this ordinance that you have a sunset provision. Number 2, one thing that this ordinance doesn't address, besides conservation measures that should be outlined in it, is also other sources such as purple pipe or desalinization that can be explored, and other options should be explored. We just can't continue to pray for rain every winter. It obviously hasn't worked, and it's gotten us to this situation.
Next, I'd like to second the comments about affordable housing. We have a lot of market rate housing in this county. We have a dearth of affordable housing. We shouldn't do anything that slows down the production of that. And those are my comments this evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Crandall, I see your hand raised again. You already spoke, sir. If you're trying to get my phone email for Mr. Mike Bond, you can send an email to me at tgillen@marinwater.org.
I would like to have another comment, Terry.
No, we aren't doing any more comments. We only have one comment time per item, sir.
My comment was about a previous item. I have not commented on this item, and I've seen other people have 2 comments tonight.
That's up to our president and the board.
It's fine.
Okay.
Fine, Mr. Crandall, fine.
Thank you. I will keep this short. This effort about the ordinance started on May 18th. That was 12 days ago. I don't understand how we gathered so much feedback and communication about what should be written in this ordinance in 12 days. I hear a number of questions coming up about the process of developing real estate in Marin on this Zoom call. Placing a grace period of 30 days on a building permit application submission is like a second in time of a day for a developer, whether they're affordable developers or market rate developers. To place that burden on people who are trying to work with districts who've been entitled for design rights, and then be subjected to a multi-year delay for a water hookup at the end of a multi-year process is incredibly burdensome, and we've heard a lot about that tonight. At a minimum, this ordinance should look at an entitled pipeline for a design entitlement pipeline and not building permits, which is out of our hands and is increasing in time and length from Mill Valley and other building departments. That is the first I think clearest place to actually evaluate something like this, rather than thinking about variances and individuals who have come to hardship during this process, multi-year process. I think a lot more thinking really needs to go into this. It should be on the same time frame as per capita allocation. If you think that per capita allocation is so significant, this is the same type of significance that your decision should be based on as per capita allocation.
Thank you.
So it should be.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any further comments, Terry? Public comments?
There aren't any.
Okay, so it's 11. So I want to be sure that we are giving this all due consideration. I want to, Molly, is this where I close the public hearing?
Yes, President Kohler, it's appropriate to close the public hearing now.
Great. I'm closing the public hearing. I'm bringing it back to the board for further comment. This is an action item. It doesn't mean we have to take action tonight, but I do want to hear from the board now that we have had extensive communication from the public. Who wants to start?
I don't, but I will.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry.
So some good comments from both sides. I do think there's some merit to relaxing the deadline. If we passed it tonight, that would really only give folks 29 days, you know. So I think relaxing the deadline until I guess it would be August 1st to give folks another month to kind of get the ones that are sort of on the cusp, you know, to the finish line, especially some of these smaller projects, I think would be something for the board to seriously consider. I also support an exemption for 100% affordable. I'm not quite sure how to wordsmith that for the Vivalon project, which has a couple floors of commercial and service, but it's 100% affordable. And, I'm familiar with that project. That project was originally going to be put at the train station, and they've really gone through a lot, and it's a long-standing project by a very established community service provider. So I'm going to have to leave that to Molly, but how we can add that exemption. I think most of the board seemed to be sort of nodding when it came up, and it's just, the equity issue is really quite compelling. I also think the equity issue for our existing customers is pretty compelling too. I know this is going to have an impact on the construction sector. Maybe, we can get through it. Maybe I know we're going to be keeping an eye on this, and it's going to be more than just praying for rain. We're going to be keeping an eye on all facets of the impacts that this is going to have. I think the idea of putting a sunset that is related to available water supply is sort of a good compromise, but I do think it should be put in the ordinance. I think if we're going to have an ordinance, there should be, if not a sunset, a very strong date to review the ordinance and renew it. So it's sort of in between. But I think if we're going to go with if the board is going to pass an ordinance, I do think it's a good idea to build that into the ordinance. I'm a big believer in trying to get the ordinance as tight as we can when it's passed, and not try to fool around with it after the fact. So those are my immediate comments. Thanks.
I think those are great comments, Larry. I'm having a problem with the rush. I understand the long-term benefit, but if we're dealing with 1/1000th of the demand, it's a pretty small number. And I don't even understand. Okay, I hear you, August 1st. Why isn't it January 1st? I mean, I don't understand what's pushing this along so quickly. And I think we should be, as you said, carefully considering the wording and getting it right the first time, and seeing where we're going and what the real benefit is. And I just don't feel, and as Cynthia said, we don't have to do anything tonight. I think I'm in a situation where I'm going to want to think about this a little more and just think about the wording and where we're headed and the true benefit and the true impact. So I'm not in favor of moving forward tonight on this ordinance.
Could President Kohler, could I just respond real briefly? My concern is looking at the figures of water consumption and habitat releases that I've looked at today. The numbers are dire. We have the latest number we have on storage was 37,592. And if you look back the last 3 or 4 years, for the next, until December 1st, which is our cutoff, the lowest amount that's been consumed in the last 4 years is 17,582 acre feet. So that would put us at about 20,000 acre feet, which is well below the cutoff. The highest level for the last 4 years has been 21,800 acre feet, which puts us below 20,000, somewhere in the vicinity of 15,000 acre feet. I don't know how much of that at that level is even going to be available without doing a pipeline extension into the reservoir. So I do think our primary commitment is to our existing customers. And I know it's, you know, it's not a perfect answer, but to me, that is the urgency. And I think we've gotten that message from several of our commenters tonight, but I do think there is urgency here. And I understand your reluctance, Director, but I do think there's urgency that we need to abide.
Well, the problem is certainly an urgent problem, but the solution we're talking about is not a urgent. I mean, it doesn't solve the problem on an urgent level. Nevertheless, I mean, I'm ambivalent as to whether we pass it tonight or not, so long as we have the possibility, not the possibility, a specific date where it's either cut off at that point, or whether it's comes back automatically for a review to the board. You know, I think we need to evaluate it at a point certain, whether that's December, January, February, whenever it is, built into the process.
Yeah, which I agree with. I think that should be part of the ordinance.
Yeah.
I'll echo a number of comments here, which is undeniably we are in a dire moment, and the water numbers, Director Bragman, you just referenced are the stark truth that are driving this and many really important conversations. I am concerned that we don't fully understand the impacts of what we're proposing to do here tonight. And if we were talking about something that was more than 1/1000th, I can't ignore that is a very, very small impact when it could be a very large economic impact. And when we are talking about trying to get people to cut by 40%, this is not going to be the solution. We won't get there through this action. Will be customer consumption and conservation where we sink or swim. And so I'm not saying that we should not take action, but I think that we need to give some more thought about how to sculpt this. I'm very concerned about low-income housing. I really feel that part of our community is not. The impact to that community is not one that we can at all take lightly. Again, with 1/1000th of an impact on our water supply. I do think that we really need to think about where in the pipeline to cut projects off when people have really significantly invested time and money and resources and their lives around a project. Again, with 1/1000th of an impact, we should just do that thoughtfully. And I really do think we should. I'm going to change my opinion here, where I do think we actually need to have in the ordinance a sunset period, in part because I'm wondering to the extent that it sends a signal to the financial community that supports development of low-income housing, that this is not necessarily going to turn into a 4 and 5 year moratorium. Just based on time, but that it'll be based on our water supply availability. And I think that having some greater clarity around that, I'm hoping maybe that minimizes the impact, the economic impact to the future development of low-income housing that is so important to our community.
Okay, so I'll maybe round us up here with a couple of comments. I'm hearing that we need a little bit more work from the staff before we make a decision on this tonight. I'm not hearing a consensus on approving the ordinance as proposed. So I want to make a couple of thoughts about this, or share a couple of thoughts about this. The first is that I think the problem is urgent. I don't think there's any question about that. And I am hearing a lot of consensus around that. It is the solution that is complex. And I want to thank everybody who has come out today and made their comments, because you are a critical and vital part of the process. And it's been helpful to me, and I certainly hear to the rest of the board. At the same time, I think it is not realistic to ask the entire community to cut back by 40% and take no action at all with regard to new connections. I think that is a contradictory message that, at least to me, is not at all credible. And it's not really about that this will solve the problem. This isn't about new hookups, or a moratorium on new hookups not solving the problem. This is about contributing to the problem, a serious, urgent, and truly historic one we have not confronted for the last 50 years. So I think moving forward with the status quo is not, at least to me, is not a reasonable approach. And I think that trying to quantify the impact of new housing, we need to have some ballparks there, but I think the suggestion that because we can add new housing and it won't make a big difference is really ignores in a way that I think that does not do us credit how serious the problem is, and the fact that we are asking people to reduce by 40%. I don't see how we can make a request like that and say, but we're just going to continue along and make no changes whatsoever in the requests for new water supply. So I think we need to get our heads around that and be clear about the seriousness of the problem and what we need to do going forward. I think a number of the board members have said, and I agree, that we need to have an exemption for affordable development. There's a way to thread this needle while not ignoring the very serious housing problems in our community. It doesn't mean that every single development or every single project in the pipeline is as urgent. And I think I'm hearing some consensus around some kind of affordable housing development. I'm going to suggest to the board and to the staff that the way to move forward on this is to reach out to a number of the affordable housing folks that have been here tonight, maybe others that weren't able to make this meeting, and see if we can come up with a proposal that is workable. I don't know if it's 100% or 70% or 80% or whatever it is, but I think we need to have a proposal around an affordable housing exemption that is workable, that does not include water for landscaping, and that ensures that any new development that is going to go forward, new demand on the system is really limited to those critical affordable housing projects. My second thought about this is that we do need data. I've heard a lot of people make a lot of representations tonight. It's very unclear to me exactly where the facts lie. And I think we do need data about exactly how many affordable housing projects are in the pipeline and where they are in that process. And while I've heard some people say that a moratorium will stop everything dead in its tracks, I'm not confident that that is in fact the case. So I'd like to ask the staff to reach out. It sounds like from what Ben said, we're already coordinating fairly extensively with planning departments. I'd like to hear more about those conversations and whether the planning departments would be willing to go forward with those plans, with those processes, with the understanding that we have no intention as a district to keep a moratorium in place farther than we need to ensure, and I think this is the critical point, to ensure that we have water to provide to all developments, to all of our consumers, current and proposed, for the future. So, I think we need better information about that and where the planning departments and where the developers are, in that process. There's nothing that requires that all these things stop and, don't move forward while we're dealing with this difficult drought situation. I think it goes without saying that any new housing that does go forward should be, limited on outdoor landscaping. I know that's a repetition, but I think it needs to be said again. With regard to the sunset, I'd like to see two proposals. I'm hearing the board split on this. There are some members that feel that this needs to be in the ordinance. I continue to not be confident that that is the only approach. I think that is limiting and gives us very little flexibility. I'd like to ensure that the board has that flexibility. I haven't heard a rationale tonight for putting a sunset in place that is different than the kinds of targets we use to put the moratorium in place in the first place. So I think we just need to hear more about that. I think we are in a position to make the point to the public that this is, that we've set targets, and I don't know that it is worth it from a public relations or a market, or a communications perspective that we deprive ourselves of the flexibility we need to act when we need to act. So I think we need to hear more from staff about those two options. But, I think one way or another, I'm hearing some consensus that we want to be very clear about building a sunset of some kind, either into the ordinance or into a related policy. My final thought is that I want to clarify that Marin Water has never just prayed for rain. In my time serving this community, I have been deeply impressed by the district's commitment to planning and thinking through long-term needs, from developing new contracts with Sonoma County to increasing conservation to new reservoirs. Ensuring reliable, safe, healthy supply for the long term has always been paramount. We are not in this situation because of failure of action and a failure of planning. There's only so much that even this district can do to hold back the tides of climate change. I am absolutely confident that we will get through, but these are extreme conditions and just don't support the status quo. So I don't know if anybody has any further comments, but those are my thoughts. I think I'm hearing that there's not a motion to adopt this ordinance tonight. Does anybody have any other thoughts on that before we move on to the final item? Okay.
I just have one thought that I've been considering for some time, that I was almost a philosophical thought, quite frankly. And that is, we really have two problems going on simultaneously. One is a very short-term problem, and the other is a long-term problem. And we keep mixing the solutions for our immediate lack of rainfall this year versus the climate change and ongoing problems that are facing us in the future. I think at some point we need to have a discussion and see some analysis that separates those two problems and addresses separate solutions for each of them, because they have different solutions. Anyway, that's a little off the subject of this, but nevertheless,
I don't think it's off the subject at all, Jack. Thank you for that. I think if people are okay, we can leave it there and move on to the final item.
President Kohler.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I just wanted to briefly, in context of those comments, my approach would be, we would plan for the next meeting to bring back more of the data and information, and then tentatively, well, based on that meeting, then we would schedule the next public hearing or whatever Molly will say, if this is going to continue or not. But I wouldn't anticipate the next meeting we'd be prepared to recommend adoption versus providing the information, if that works.
I think that does work. And I think that's better. I think having, I think we are truly fortunate to have a public that is as engaged and as thoughtful on these issues as we do. And I think we do need to do, a little bit more conversation and a little bit more thinking through these issues. So I think a next meeting that is, again, exploring the options, maybe coming forward with a couple of alternative scenarios that does not bring with it the pressure of a decision point. And I want to be clear that I really agree with everybody who has said this is urgent. It is urgent, but at the same time, I think we need a solution that, balances all of these different needs. And it doesn't mean that we're stopping. Carrie is still here. I don't know how you're still awake, Carrie, but we're going to be going very aggressively with her conservation program and with Jeannie's outreach. We had what was it, Jeannie? Something like 60,000 or more contacts on social media just in the last week. So the word is going out, and this doesn't stop our efforts. But I think dealing with this particular issue, especially given the historic nature of it and the impacts. I think we do need, you're right, Ben, I think we do need another conversation that's really working through the solution sets.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be wrapped up in looking at how our conservation efforts, and by our, I mean everybody in the community,
exactly,
as Larry Russell described, how that's actually penciling out, because the numbers are dire and it's not going to get any better. And I do understand the need to take a very careful approach. So I'm on board with that.
Yeah, I want to echo that, because it's just too important not to, is that this is a really important issue, but I don't want this to take up the airspace or the time to avoid not addressing the conservation issues, which are really where we're going to need to see substantial progress. And so I'm hoping that we can make sure that we are really, if we have to prioritize our time, we really have got to come up with the right path forward to advance conservation, because that is where we're going to save thousands of acre feet that we
Oh.
need to save.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And to be clear, that's where we have put our time, for the last 6 months. So that's where we've invested the vast majority of our time. I do think that we have heard from any number of people tonight, and I think it is a fair point. We will be sending a challenging mixed message to the community if we do not take action on new demands on the system while asking our current users to cut back by 40%. And I think we have to take that with extreme seriousness. We cannot be in a position where we're sending mixed messages. Our message has to be clear, it has to be consistent, and it has to be rational.
I think
it
we're
also
all
has to be
That's where I'm
fair.
at.
It has to be fair.
Yeah.
And to that end, Ben, I think that to the extent you can, we should attempt to calculate $1 per acre foot. What is the cost to the development community versus the water saved? As Monty said, we are after the other 999. That's where the action is, not in the one. And, I having serious issues with the value. I understand the emotional value. I got that. But I'm talking about the real value. And I think that's the part we need to look at is, it's sounding to me like the dollars per acre foot are probably up in the 6 figures or something like that. So I just, ask everyone to think about it. I'm all in favor of moving forward with the right document. And I do understand, like I say, the emotional side of it and the fairness, but we also have to look at the big picture and how much is it costing to save that acre foot of water?
I think it's a question, Larry, also of who it's costing.
Yeah.
Because I got to tell you, I have heard from dozens of people who they cannot get their heads, and I think it's fair. They cannot get their heads around the thought that we are asking for a 40% reduction while acting as though nothing's different and making no attempt whatsoever to do anything about new demands on the system. And I am not confident. There is no data here at all suggesting, there's been a lot of conversation, but I have seen no data. And I think we have to, again, we're approaching 11:30. So maybe, it's probably time to bring this to a close. But I have seen, if there is data that there is a cost to the district, we are the district. We are representing ratepayers. And I think we have to talk about our costs. Those are the costs we need to be concerned about here. The cost of the ratepayers that is our fiduciary responsibility.
But it's also a cost to the community. And I think we need to look at the big picture. And I agree with you about data. It's all tummy rubbing at this point. And I think I'm sure the folks that are involved will be happy to supply whatever data they think is appropriate. And we need to look at it that way. But again, I think we have to look at it in a, cool manner and look at the benefit that's returned from the action. So
I think we all agree with that. This is not a dollars and cents issue. We can spend all the water we want. And if there isn't water in the reservoirs for the residents and the businesses and the institutions that are here, then all of that's just mumbo jumbo. I'm sorry.
No, that's not true at all. You see, the whole problem, Cynthia, is it's the 10% reduction. If we were at 35% reduction, I would say we're making progress. Whether we have 60,000 connections or not to the Instagram or whoever it's on, the point is we're not getting there, okay?
And are we going to get there? We tell the residents you can serve, but we're going to continue to hook up new developments? Come on, who is going to do that? We need to send a message that is clear, that is rational, and that's not. I'm sorry.
I think we have to do both.
I just disagree.
I think we. I don't think, at least I don't hear any of us saying that it's one or the other. I think we're talking about doing both. I think that we need to come back to this at our next board meeting and advance both, and to do it wisely, and to do it transparently with good data, so that what we do decide to do makes sense. I agree, Cynthia, that we cannot be sending a message that we can just keep hooking people up without any regard for thought about the impact. But we also need to be clear about what that impact is, so we're not overselling what the impact will be of that, of banning new hookups.
I
So
think we need to really distinguish between the critical issue of affordable housing and other housing. Not every single development in this county is affordable housing. And that is, I think, the issue that's really been conflated here tonight. So I just want to end this by saying, I think we have a very strong consensus about support for affordable housing, which is generally going to be much less water intensive than other types of housing, but and development. But we are not yet sending a consistent message to our ratepayers, and I think that's a problem. And I think we've got a plan to get there, Ben. And given that it's 11:30 and most of us are on the verge of collapse, I think we should call, and I'd like to call an end to this item because we have one more item on the agenda tonight, if that's okay with everybody.
So really quickly, President Kohler, I had considered whether we wanted to reopen the public hearing and then continue it to a date certain, but given that we're going to be coming back at the next board meeting with additional discussion and not a specific action, I don't think that's necessary. So
great.
Unless, okay.
I think that's a fine way to proceed. Thank you.
We'll just renotice the public hearing for the next round.
I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
So we are going to move on to the regular calendar, item 8, filling a mechanical and electrical maintenance worker position. I'm really sorry for whichever staff members had to sit through all of this to that. Hopefully you're doing okay.
We'll see how quick Paul can do this.
Okay.
And that's how a bill becomes a law. No.
Yeah.
You guys are amazing, have amazing stamina and patience. My hat's off to you tonight for sure. Paul Sellier, Operations Director. We have a vacancy in the mechanical and electrical group in the operations division. Due to an early retirement, one of our young, most promising M&E workers retired early to go and start his own business and pursue his entrepreneurial dreams, presumably. This is a group that maintains pretty much anything that has electricity and moves at the water district, down to our HVAC systems. It is a very important position for us. Salary and benefits for this position range from $115,000 to $147,000. Filling the position, which is budgeted, does not increase the FTE in the operations division. And tonight's staff is recommending that the board authorize the general manager to recruit and hire one mechanical and electrical maintenance worker in the operations division.
Sounds like a good idea. Do we have a motion?
Within the budget?
Yes.
Okay, move approval.
Second.
Do we have any public comment on this item, Terry?
We do not.
Do we have any other further board comment on this item?
That's a no.
Looks like a no. Looking for a, I was just waiting because I think people are comatose. Terry, do a roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
Aye.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Kohler.
Aye. All right, future agenda items.
Nothing has changed. I just want to remind the board that we will be having a Finance and Administration Committee meeting this month instead of next month, and that's it.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for a great, really a good discussion, and thank the staff for all of their work on this. And we will look forward to the next informational conversation about this. Have a good night, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Take care.
Good night.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you all.